I caught a man in a park ranger uniform who wasn't one of us. I've worked as a ranger in Olympic National Park for almost 8 years now. That place is beautiful in the kind of way that makes you forget how dangerous it can be. Towering evergreens, fog-thick valleys, rivers that sound like whispering voices if you're alone too long. It's the kind of terrain that feels ancient, like it's watching you more than you're watching it. Most of my job is boring stuff. Trail checks, radioing hikers who stayed out too late, dragging dumbasses out of restricted areas. But every once in a while, you get a call that doesn't sit right, the kind where your gut clenches before the radio even goes quiet. This started about a month ago, early spring. The trails were still slushy with snowmelt, which meant fewer crowds. I was posted at the Hoh Rainforest Outpost, pretty remote. No cell reception, just a data-dakey ranger radio and the occasional flyover from search and rescue. I'd been on evening patrol heading toward the Blue Glacier Spur when I spotted someone ahead of me on the trail. He had the uniform, brown slacks, green jacket, wide-brimmed hat. From the back, everything looked legit, but the way he was standing, arms stiff at his sides, head tilted like he was listening too hard to something I couldn't hear. I called out, "Hey, you from the Fork Station." I figured maybe they sent someone to assist with some storm damage we'd had earlier in the week. The guy didn't move, didn't even flinch. I walked closer, trying not to sound weird about it. "You good, man?" When I was maybe 20 feet away, he turned. I don't know how else to say it. Something was off about his face. Not wrong in an obvious way. He looked normal. Except, it was too normal, like someone trying to copy what a person should look like. His eyes didn't track right. He blinked too slow, like he was trying to remember when to do it. And his uniform, it looked about right, but the patches were sewn in the wrong places. Name tag was missing. His badge was plastic, not even the right font. I felt my stomach tighten. "You got ID?" I asked, keeping my tone calm but assertive. He stared at me, then smiled. The kind of smile that doesn't touch the eyes. His lips moved like he was going to say something, but nothing came out. I instinctively reached for my radio. "This is Unit 11 at trail marker 22 near Glacier Point. I've got an unidentified individual in what looks like ranger gear. No ID. Unresponsive. Requesting backup or verification on visiting staff." There was a pause. Then the reply came, crackling through. "Copy that, Unit 11. There's no visiting personnel assigned to your sector today. Confirm again. Over." I looked up. The guy was gone. Just vanished. Like I blinked and he stepped behind a tree. Only there were no trees close enough to hide behind. The nearest thicket was across the trail, at least 15 feet away. And there was no sound, no crunch of leaves, no branches snapping, no breathing. I stood there, heart thudding in my ears, scanning every inch of the trail. The sun was almost gone by then, and the shadows were starting to get thick. I didn't see him again that night, but I didn't sleep much either. Every creak of the cabin floorboards, every gust of wind scraping the side of the outpost had me reaching for the rifle locked under my cot. The worst part? When I checked the log the next morning, someone had opened the supply shed, but it was still locked. From the inside. I told myself the lock thing was just a mistake. Maybe I'd left it ajar the night before, and the wind blew it open. Maybe someone else came by, someone with a key. I even asked around during the next radio check-in. Fork said no one had been sent out. Port Angeles said the same. Still, I filed an incident report just in case. The following few days were quiet. Cold mornings, foggy afternoons, standard maintenance patrols. But I kept thinking about that guy, the silent ranger, the fake badge, the plastic grin. I kept replaying that moment where he just wasn't there anymore. No noise, no movement. Like he had blinked out of existence. Then hikers started coming in with odd reports. A group of college kids from Spokane stopped by the station 2 days after my sighting. They were rattled. Nothing extreme, but definitely spooked. Said they'd seen a man standing in the tree line near the waterfall trail. Just standing, not moving. When they waved at him, he turned around and walked into the forest. No trail or anything, just disappeared between the trees. One of them, a girl in a puffy North Face jacket, said it felt like he wanted them to follow, like he was leading them somewhere. But something about him felt fake, like it was a trick. That word hit me hard. I asked what he looked like. Same uniform, same wide-brimmed hat. Said he didn't speak, just stood there with this weird frozen expression, like he was waiting for something. After they left, I decided to hike that trail again myself. There's a spot along that path, not even a real marker, just a subtle shift in the dirt, like the trail splits for a few feet before merging back. Nobody ever takes the fork. It's a runoff route meant to divert rainwater in storms, not for hikers. But when I got to it, I stopped. There were footprints in the mud. Boot prints. Big ones. I crouched down to look. They matched our issue boots. Same tread, same shape. But the stride was weird. Too long, like the person had been walking stiff-legged or dragging one foot behind. I followed them maybe 30 yards off the path. The deeper I went, the quieter everything got. The kind of silence that makes your eardrums ring. Then I found the fire pit. It wasn't like a hiker's. No rocks, no structure. Just scorched earth and half-burnt wood. Around it were bones, small ones, maybe rabbit or raccoon, but they were arranged in a circle, neatly placed, like some weird art project. In the center, blackened by soot, was a ranger hat, identical to mine. I radioed it in. Dispatch asked if I wanted backup. I said yes. An hour later, I was still waiting. That's when I heard someone whistling. No clear tune, just 3 rising notes, soft and slow, like a lullaby you only half remember from childhood. I spun around, rifle half raised. The whistling stopped. "Hello?" I called. Nothing. Just as I started backing away, I saw something sticking out of the underbrush. A scrap of cloth. I tugged it free. It was part of a ranger's shirt, torn, faded, caked in dried mud and something darker. The patch said M. Gilroy. I didn't recognize the name, but the uniform was ours. All right, stitching, font, everything correct, except that shirt wasn't from the current uniform design. It was discontinued 4 years ago. I took it with me. Back at the station, I searched the employee records. No Gilroy, past or present. I even asked the older rangers during the next supply drop. Nobody had heard of him. One guy, Charlie, got real quiet when he saw the shirt. Said it looked too familiar. "Where'd you find that?" he asked. I told him. He just nodded once, then said, "Keep your doors locked at night, even the shed." That night, I deadbolted everything. I double-checked the shed padlock and put a chair under the doorknob of the cabin. Then I went to bed with the rifle across my chest. Around 3 a.m., something woke me up. Not a sound, a smell. It was faint but unmistakable, the acrid reek of burnt fabric and wet ash. I sat up slowly, my skin cold and tight. And there, at the edge of the window, was the silhouette of a man, wide-brimmed hat, shoulders too straight, unmoving. Watching me sleep. By the time I threw the door open, he was gone. But he'd left footprints on the inside of the window ledge. And the muddy ranger hat I'd taken from the fire pit? It was now sitting on my bed, dry, clean, and still warm. I didn't sleep for more than 10 minutes at a time. After that night, every creak of the floorboards felt deliberate. Every gust of wind scraping the side of the cabin sounded like someone dragging their fingers across wood, slow and patient. The next morning, I grabbed the hat, still resting exactly where I left it on the edge of the mattress, and shoved it into a plastic evidence bag. It still smelled like charred pine and sweat, even though it looked clean. I drove it down to the Forks Ranger Station. I didn't trust our outpost anymore. Told the supervisor, Rob Halgren, what had happened. Not everything. Not the footprints inside the window, not the frozen face I'd seen on the trail. Just the stuff I could back up. The old uniform, the fire pit, the unlogged person in full gear. He brushed it off as a local squatter, or maybe a disgruntled former employee. Said folks sometimes steal uniforms to get into restricted areas, spook tourists, or sell park gear on eBay. Told me to file a report with the Park Service and let the system work. But Rob didn't look me in the eyes while he said it. And as I was heading out the door, he muttered something. Soft, like he wasn't meant to say it aloud. "Should have stayed buried." I stopped. "What?" He just shook his head and waved me off like he was tired. "Nothing. Just watch your back." Okay, I took the long route back to my outpost that afternoon. Didn't want to be near the cabin before sunset. Figured I'd do a final sweep of the Southern Trail loop, the one that curved toward the backcountry basin we call Devil's Throat. Locals avoid it. Old logging stories. Mostly missing workers, strange accidents, that kind of thing. About 2 miles in, I saw another set of footprints. Same tread, same long, awkward stride. They were recent, too, pressed into the mossy trail like the person had come through not more than an hour before me. But there was something else that chilled me. The prints doubled back on themselves. Whoever it was had walked in a wide circle multiple times, like they were pacing or waiting. I followed them off the trail. About 100 yards in, the trees opened into a clearing I didn't recognize. Not on the map. Not on any terrain charts I'd ever seen. It was wrong. That's the best way I can say it. The space felt too quiet, too open, the way snow mutes sound after a storm, even though the air was dry. A boulder sat in the middle, black as obsidian. Fresh gouges clawed across it, like someone had taken a knife to the stone. And right there, leaning against the boulder, was another ranger shirt. This one was soaked in something. Not mud, not entirely blood either. It was thicker, darker, like oil with a copper tint. And next to it, a name badge. Metal, polished. M. Gilroy. Again, exactly the same as the one I found earlier. Only this time the badge was brand new. No scratches, no rust, like it had been printed yesterday. I started backing up slowly, and then I heard it. That whistling again. Same 3 notes. Soft, slow, but closer this time. Too close. I turned and caught just a glimpse of something moving behind a tree. Just enough to see that damn uniform. That wide-brimmed hat. His back was to me again, just like before. Rigid, still, arms tight against his sides. Then he stepped sideways without turning and disappeared behind a tree he couldn't have fit behind. I froze. He hadn't walked. He hadn't even shifted. It was like someone dragging a cutout across a piece of paper. Smooth, soundless. The radio on my belt cracked to life. Unit 11, you there? We just got a distress ping off your GPS. You good? I fumbled for it. Dispatch, I need backup now. I'm near marker 42, just past Devil's Throat. I found clothing from an unconfirmed ranger ID. Possible impersonator. Extremely dangerous. He's stalking the trails. Repeat, this guy is not one of us. There was silence. Then static. Then, return to the station, Unit 11. Do not pursue. Do not engage. Lock everything. Await instruction. The voice didn't sound like dispatch. Too flat. No call sign. No repeat back. Just that one cold message. And then I heard the click. Not from the radio, from behind me. I turned around. There was a camera nailed into the tree nearest to me. One of ours. Trail cam. Motion triggered, but it wasn't pointed at wildlife paths. It was angled down at me. The lens was still moving, still adjusting. Someone had just remotely accessed it. There weren't supposed to be any cameras this far out. I yanked the battery pack out and crushed the SD card under my boot. I didn't even think. Just reacted. Then I ran. Not jogged. Ran. All the way back to my outpost, lungs burning, legs cramping, ears straining for footsteps that never came. When I got back, I slammed the door shut and locked every bolt. That was when I saw it. The muddy ranger hat. It was back on my bed. This time it was wet, dripping, and carved into the brim like with a blade were the words, "Gilroy lives here now." I didn't move for hours. I sat there on the edge of the cot with my back against the wall, rifle on my lap, and just watched the hat. Watched it drip, a slow, rhythmic plink, plink, plink onto the plywood floor. The water was dark, stained with something thick and red, like someone had steeped rust in a bucket for a week. I didn't dare touch it again. By sunrise, I was shaking. It was the kind of cold that gets into your bones. But I knew it wasn't the temperature. I was still soaked in sweat, shirt clinging to my back, teeth clenched so tight my jaw ached. I called in sick that morning, said I wasn't feeling right. Might have caught something. They said, fine, rest up. But no one offered to swing by. No one asked questions. That afternoon, I packed up a bag and drove down to Port Angeles to crash at a cheap roadside motel. Place was called the Whispering Cedars. One of those no-frills joints with flickering neon and curtains that don't quite close all the way. I needed noise, cars, civilization, something with walls that weren't made of pine. I didn't sleep much there either. because that night, someone slid something under my motel room door. I almost didn't notice it. I'd left the TV on, one of those late-night History Channel marathons where everything turns into an alien conspiracy. When I finally clicked it off, I saw the edge of an envelope sticking out on the carpet. No return address, no markings, just a single Polaroid inside, but not of me. It was a photo of the inside of my ranger cabin, taken from my bedroom door. My rifle was on the bed. My boots were at the foot of it. You could see the logbook I'd left open on the desk. The timestamp on the bottom corner was from the previous night, meaning someone had been inside while I slept just feet away. My legs gave out. I hit the floor, hands shaking so hard I almost tore the picture in half. I wanted to drive straight to the police, but what was I going to say? That someone broke into a government cabin and left me a photograph in a motel 50 miles away? I checked out before sunrise and drove back to the park. I don't know why. Maybe I was hoping to prove to myself it wasn't real, that the photo was old, that it was some kind of sick prank. I didn't care. When I opened the cabin door, I almost vomited. Everything was exactly as it had looked in the photo. Rifle on the bed. Logbook open to the same page. But now there were footprints. Muddy, coming in through the door, looping around the room, stopping right beside where I should have been sleeping. I followed them with my eyes. They didn't leave the way they came in. They led to the closet. My hand hovered over the knob. I didn't want to open it. Every part of me screamed to burn the whole place down and run. But I opened it anyway. Empty, except for a second ranger uniform hanging neatly on a wire hanger. No dust, no fold lines. It had been placed there recently. And on the shelf above it, there was something carved into the wood. Not a word this time. Just a symbol. 3 sharp lines pointing down like crooked teeth. And underneath it, the number. Start 1973. I don't know why that hit me so hard, but it felt significant. Like a clue I couldn't read yet. I took a photo of it with my phone. First time I'd used the damn thing in days. That night, I made a decision. I needed answers. I remembered Charlie, the older ranger, the one who'd recognized Gilroy's name. He'd been around forever, long before most of us. Quiet guy, paranoid, but sharp. Lived up north near Sekiu in this little trailer with solar panels and no Wi-Fi. Total off-grid hermit. I drove up the next day. When I pulled into his gravel driveway, he was already standing outside, arms crossed. He looked like he hadn't slept. I was wondering how long it would take you to show up, he said, deadpan. I didn't say anything, just held up the picture of the carving, the 3 lines, the number. Charlie's face went pale. He didn't invite me inside. He just walked around back, grabbed a rusted metal tin from under a loose board on the porch, and handed it to me. Inside were old newspaper clippings, some yellowed, others water damaged, all about Olympic Park, and they all had one thing in common: rangers missing, always alone. One headline read, "Local ranger disappears without a trace." Last known location, Devil's Throat. Date, 1973. There was a photo, black and white, blurry. The man in the shot was standing in front of a fire pit. Same posture, same stiff stance, same wide-brimmed hat. Under the photo, in small type, Ranger Martin Gilroy. Charlie lit a cigarette with shaking fingers and said, he was never found. Search went on for weeks. No prints, no gear, just his name badge nailed to a tree. I asked him how he knew all this. He looked at me, dead serious. Because I saw him last month. Same place you did. He hasn't aged a day. He exhaled and said 5 words I'll never forget. Gilroy doesn't live alone anymore. Charlie wouldn't say more after that. I tried asking questions. What happened to Gilroy? What does the symbol mean? Who else knows? But he just stared off into the woods behind his trailer. Cigarette burned down to the filter, lips tight. It was like something in him had already decided I was too far gone to help. Before I left, he pressed an old laminated map into my hands. It was brittle at the corners, smelled like mildew and sweat, and had faded red markings drawn all across it. Circles, X's, dates. Some went back decades. Stay away from the places marked with the symbol, he muttered. If you see a second set of your own footprints, turn around. Don't follow the calls. Don't answer if it says your name. I asked what he meant by it. Charlie went back inside without a word. I drove off and pulled over a few miles down the road to study the map. Most of the marks were deep in the backcountry along trails that had since been shut down or renamed. But one of them, one of the red X's, was less than a mile from my station. Gravedigger's Hollow. I'd been there just once. No real trail, just a collapsed mine shaft from the turn of the century, tucked into a ridge of moss-covered stone, supposedly sealed after a rockfall. Nothing but stories and old warnings. But I couldn't stop thinking about the photo from 1973. Gilroy standing near the fire pit, just like I'd seen him, just like he'd been standing when he watched me sleep. I waited until dusk before heading out. I didn't tell anyone. I packed the map, a flashlight, a sidearm, and a flare gun. Left a note taped to my bunk, just in case. If I'm not back by sunrise, don't look for me. Call state troopers and send them to Gravedigger's Hollow. The trail was overgrown, brush thick as a wall, trees hanging low like they were trying to hold me back. By the time I reached the ridge, it was almost full dark. My breath fogged in front of me. The air stank of mildew and something else, like burnt copper and wet fur. The mine shaft was still there, but it wasn't sealed anymore. The boards had been torn out, not rotted, ripped. Splinters splayed outward like claws had pried them loose. And in the dirt just outside the entrance, I found boot prints. 2 sets, one fresh, one older, but identical tread. Both were mine. I told myself it was a trick of the light, that maybe someone else wore the same boots, that maybe the ground had shifted. But then I heard it, that damn whistling. 3 notes, rising, slow. But this time, it was inside the shaft. I raised the flashlight and stepped forward. Just inside the mouth, someone had painted on the wall in black ash and soot the symbol, the 3 crooked lines pointing down. Below it, scratched in with something sharp, were the words, "You were supposed to forget." My light flickered. Not the battery dying, this was something else, like the shadows were interfering with it. Then, just ahead, maybe 15 feet in, I saw him, Gilroy, standing in the tunnel, unmoving, hat low over his face. His ranger shirt was torn open, pale skin visible underneath like bark peeled off a tree. His arms were stiff, fingers bloated. But it was the smell that hit me hardest. Rot. Years old, the kind of smell that lives in your nose for days. I aimed my sidearm at him. Don't move. He didn't. I stepped closer, my light shaking in my grip. He didn't breathe, didn't blink. I was almost within arm's reach when I realized he wasn't looking at me. He was looking past me. I spun around. There was another ranger behind me. Same uniform, same stance. No face, just blank skin where the eyes and mouth should be, stretched taut like wet paper. Its chest heaved once, and the sound it made was not a breath. It was a laugh, low, broken, like air pushed through shredded lungs. I fired the sidearm twice. The thing didn't flinch. I turned and sprinted out of the shaft, crashing through branches, rocks tearing into my shins. I didn't stop until I saw the glow of my cabin lights in the distance, every muscle in my body screaming. When I finally collapsed inside, I slammed the door shut and dropped to the floor. That was 2 days ago. Since then, the radios haven't worked. The generator cuts out at night. My phone battery is dead and won't recharge. Even the solar pack won't hold a charge. And last night I woke up to breathing. Not mine. Slow. Wet. Clothes. Coming from under my bed. When I finally got the guts to look, nothing was there. But carved into the wooden slats beneath my mattress were 3 words, jagged and deep. You're next, Ranger. I haven't left the cabin in over 30 hours. I don't know what time it is anymore. My watch stopped at 3:17 a.m. and hasn't ticked since. Every window is covered, every door locked, though I don't know why I bother. Whatever this is, locks don't seem to matter. The last time I looked outside, I saw movement. At first, I thought it was a hiker. Maybe help, finally. But then I saw the uniform. That same goddamn ranger outfit. It looked just like mine, except older, faded, as if time had worn through it, until only the idea of the uniform remained. He was standing at the tree line, motionless. Then another one appeared beside him, and another. 3 of them, all identical, all still. None of them moved. None of them came closer. They just watched. I tried the radio again. Static. I tried the flare gun, fired it into the sky like a last desperate scream. Nothing. That night, they got closer. I didn't hear them, didn't see them move. But when I woke up, muddy footprints circled the outside of the cabin. More than 3 now, dozens. Some small, some too large to be human. But all boot prints, all from Ranger issue gear. The door had scratches on it, deep, uneven. Like someone had dragged a nail or a key across the wood over and over. Not trying to get in, just reminding me they could. There's a pattern to them. I can see it now. 3 long lines, down over and over again. Again and again. That symbol. I thought I was losing my mind until I checked the old employee ledger, the one we keep in the bottom drawer of the filing cabinet, the one nobody ever looks at. Names, dates, assignments. In 1973, 4 Rangers were listed for patrol in this section of Olympic. Martin Gilroy, Harlan Brooks, Samuel Dawes, and a 4th name that's been blacked out, literally scratched from the paper. But something's faint behind it. I rubbed it with a pencil, shaded the spot like you do with an old gravestone. The outline of my name. Mine. The year was wrong, though. It didn't say 2025. It said 1973. I don't know what this place is. A loop. A trap. Something left behind. Older than the park. Older than people. Maybe we were never meant to be here. Maybe that's why they put rangers out here in the first place. Not to protect the park from people, but to protect people from what's underneath it. I'm writing this on the backs of old trail maps, pages torn from the ranger manual. Anything I can leave behind because I hear them now. Inside. Not footsteps. Breathing. Low. Close. All around. They've finally come in. I saw the door creak open. Not forced, just invited. Like the cabin itself was tired of holding them back. The last thing I saw before the lights went out was my reflection in the window. But it wasn't me. It was Gilroy. Smiling. Wearing my badge. If you find this, don't come looking. Don't answer if they call your name. And whatever you do, don't put on the hat. Can you tell me what time you are listening to this video? How do you feel about my video? If you like, please like and subscribe, and comment to let me know. That is a great motivation for me. Thank you, guys. A stranger handed me a map with one spot marked. Don't. They had me working solo shifts that week up in the Bitterroot Range, northern Montana. You know the kind. Endless trees, air so clean it stings your nose, and silence so deep you swear it has weight. I'd just been transferred to the Lolo National Forest outpost. A lonely shed with a bunk and a radio a few miles off the main hiking loop. I didn't mind the isolation after 4 years of dealing with drunk tourists, screaming kids, and hikers who couldn't read a trail map if their lives depended on it. The quiet was welcome. But quiet out here isn't like quiet in town. It presses in on you, gnaws at you, and sometimes it listens back. The week had started off normal. Just trail maintenance, picking up litter, checking fire conditions. But that Wednesday, I was restocking pamphlets at the visitor station when this guy walks in. Late 50s, maybe early 60s. Beard like tangled wire, ratty Carhartt jacket. His hands were shaking, not from the cold. He wasn't shivering. It was more like tremors, like he'd seen something and it hadn't left him. He came right up to the desk, laid a crumpled topographic map in front of me, and said, "Dead quiet. Whatever you do, don't go here." He tapped a spot with his index finger, nail yellowed and cracked. No town name, no trailhead, nothing. Just a patch of forest about 20 miles west of the main loop. Off-ridge, steep ridges and thick forest. I'd been all over the park during training. I didn't even recognize the area. I tried to ask him what was there. His eyes twitched toward the windows like he thought something might be watching us. Don't ask, don't look, just don't. Then he walked out. No name, no explanation. Got into a rusty old Silverado and drove off before I could stop him. Later that night, curiosity got the better of me. I couldn't help it. I scanned the map. That spot, circled in red, hand-drawn with shaky lines. The park maps didn't even mark that area. And I realized something. That part of the forest had no ranger patrols, no cameras, no foot traffic. Not even wildlife collar signals showed up from that quadrant. I radioed in and asked about it, just offhand, trying to sound casual. Dispatch responded with, "Must be a dead zone. You know how GPS drops out in those valleys?" And that was it. No one seemed to know or care that there was a whole slice of forest out there that wasn't being monitored. The next day, I packed up and told myself I'd just check it out. Just a few hours in and back. Basic recon. I marked my GPS, packed a flare, and brought extra water. I didn't tell anyone where I was going. I didn't want to get chewed out for unauthorized exploration. Looking back, that was my first mistake. The entrance to the woods looked like every other patch of timber up there. Pine, thick underbrush, sun barely punching through the canopy. But the deeper I went, the more off it felt. Trails that should have been there, gone. Trees leaned at angles that made no sense. Birds, if they were there, weren't making any noise. The air started to feel thicker, like breathing through a wool blanket. About 2 hours in, I came across something that didn't belong. A campsite. Old. Like really old. Torn up tent, faded canvas, gear scattered everywhere. There was a hiking boot half sunk into the moss. Not placed, dropped like someone left in a damn hurry. And there was something written on the tent flap. Carved in with a blade. Don't stay past dark. It was already 3:17 p.m. Sunset hits early in those valleys. I should have turned back, but I didn't, because I'm a dumbass. And part of me wanted to prove this was all nothing. Some guy with mental issues, or maybe an old legend that had mutated over the years. So I pushed deeper in, and I started to smell it. This rotting, coppery stench. You know that smell when roadkill's been baking in the sun for a day or two? Like that, but stronger. Wetter. It made me gag. And the worst part was, it didn't fade as I moved. It followed. That's when I heard twigs snapping behind me. Not like a deer, not even a bear. No, this was 2 feet. Heavy, deliberate. Stopping when I stopped. I spun around, flashlight up. Nothing, no animals, no wind, no rustling. Just the smell, and that silence again. Watching me. I decided then and there I was heading back. Whatever was out here, I didn't want to meet it. But when I turned around, the trail was gone. Not overgrown. Gone. The moss underfoot was untouched. No boot prints, no broken branches, nothing to mark how I came in. And right then, in that awful quiet, I heard a voice. It was my own, whispering my name from deeper in the trees. Just out of sight. I stood frozen. The whisper came again, soft, raspy, just barely audible. My name, echoing in that hollow, throat-scraping tone, like it was being dragged across glass. Liam. It wasn't a shout. It wasn't even a call for help. It sounded like someone trying to remember my name, trying to mimic how it felt in their mouth. The hairs on my arms lifted like static. I scanned every inch of those woods, squinting into the thick underbrush. My flashlight beam trembled as it slid over tree trunks, stumps, dead ferns. All still. All wrong. I took a step back, and the woods creaked. Not under me. Not around me. They responded. I tried the radio. "Base, this is Ranger Liam Donnelly. I'm off route near Quadrant Charlie 6. Coordinates?" I checked my GPS. Blank screen. No signal. Not even a loading icon. Just a dead gray glow. I should have panicked, but something about the air in that place numbed you. Like your fear was being kept just under the surface. A trembling beast behind glass. I took out my compass. The needle spun twice, then stopped, pointing west. I wasn't sure it was right, but it was all I had. I walked. Every 50 feet I stopped, listened, marked a tree with my knife. I thought maybe if I made enough marks, I could backtrack. But after 10 minutes, I passed the same carved trunk twice. I know I marked different trees. That's when I really started to lose my grip. The sun dropped lower, fast, like someone had yanked the light down behind the hills. Shadows came early, and thick. I didn't even notice at first how cold it got. Bone deep, wet cold, like river water in October. I zipped up, but it didn't help. The air wasn't just cold, it felt wrong in my lungs. Damp, almost greasy. That smell, the rot. It hadn't left, just kept ghosting behind me like something was carrying it. I started to hear more sounds now. Not words, movements, light crunches. Once I heard a low groan like a dying animal in the brush. But when I swept my light over it, I saw nothing. The moss didn't even look disturbed. I came up on a clearing, open space, maybe 30 feet wide, a few tree stumps, long dead. One in the center was carved with deep horizontal gouges, like claw marks, but too high to be from any animal I know. I nearly dropped my flashlight when I saw it. A man was sitting on the stump, motionless. I raised my light, hand shaking. My voice came out hoarse. "Sir, are you okay?" He didn't move. He was dressed in full hiker gear. Columbia jacket, North Face boots, Rei pack beside him, mud-caked but not torn. Everything looked new, except for his face. It was blank, expressionless. His eyes were open, staring forward like someone had pressed pause. Lips parted slightly. No breath, no blink. I stepped closer and nearly gagged. His skin was grayish, pale, with a waxy shine, like he'd been dead for weeks. But there was no smell coming from him. All that rot, it wasn't his. That's when I saw the paper in his hand. It looked like part of a brochure, one of the parks, folded up into a neat square. I hesitated, then took it. His fingers didn't resist. They just let go. I unfolded it and immediately felt my stomach lurch. It was a map, the same one the man from the visitor center had left with me. Same area circled in red. But now there was another circle scribbled in darker ink, directly where I was standing. Below it, scrawled in frantic writing, "You're here too late." I heard something behind me, fast. I turned, nearly dropped the map. Something ran between the trees. I only saw a blur. Long arms, impossibly thin, hunched low like it ran on all fours. But it was fast. Too fast for anything human. The air snapped, like pressure breaking around it. No leaves moved, no trail was left, just silence. I backed away slowly, heart in my throat. And the hiker, dead or whatever he was, still didn't move. And then he blinked. Just once, slowly. That's when I ran. I didn't even try to find the way I came in. I just barreled into the brush. Branches sliced my face. Thorns caught my sleeves. My boots sank in soft mud. But I didn't stop. I ran until my legs screamed, lungs burned, and I collapsed against a tree. I don't know how long I stayed there, wheezing, staring into the dark. That's when I noticed there was a second set of footprints next to mine. Fresh. Deeper than mine. Barefoot. They hadn't been there before, and they were facing me. I stared at those prints like my brain couldn't process them. They were pressed deep into the damp forest floor. Barefoot. The toes were long and narrow like a human's, but not quite. Almost too symmetrical. Too clean. No tread. No dragging. I swear to God, they hadn't been there a second ago. I spun around, sweeping my flashlight in a wild arc. The beam bounced off trees, scattered shadows that shouldn't have been there, caught glints in the wet moss, but nothing human, or animal, or anything. I held my breath, trying to hear beyond the pounding in my ears. Just wind, right? Just wind through the pines, that dry rustle. But there was something else. Quiet, like breath, like panting, right behind the tree line. I shouted, "Who's there?" No answer, just the echo bouncing off trees like a taunt. I was done being brave. I bolted downhill. Anywhere that sloped felt like a way out. I didn't care about my trail anymore. My knees slammed into roots and rocks. Branches clawed at my jacket. I lost the trail markers. My compass was useless, and the map I'd taken off the dead hiker was gone. Either dropped or taken. I couldn't remember. My flashlight flickered. Once, twice. I slammed it against my hand. The batteries were new. This wasn't supposed to happen. Then the beam caught something just ahead. A structure. Not a building. Not quite. It looked like an old ranger shed. The kind we abandoned back in the 70s. Rotting wood, moss-covered roof, and a collapsed porch. There were old USFS logos barely visible on the door. One of those official use-only cabins we used to leave for emergency storms or overnight patrols. It shouldn't have been there. I knew every shelter in the Lolo forest. There was no record of one in this quadrant. But I wasn't about to pass it up. I got inside and slammed the door shut behind me. Locked it with a rusted bolt. The walls groaned as the wind picked up outside, howling low and strange, like it was calling out words. Inside, it was pitch black. My flashlight gave a dim cone of light. The place was bare, dusty shelves, a rotted cot with shredded canvas, a metal desk with something carved into the top. I leaned in, wiped off dirt and splinters, and saw what was etched deep with a knife. "It doesn't like light." My fingers went cold. I turned slowly, keeping the light steady. I didn't want to test that warning. There was a window, just one. The glass was fogged, old and yellowed. I crept toward it, peered out, and saw a face. Right there. inches from the window, not pressed against the glass, just standing there, eyes wide open, no whites, just black, glossy voids. A grin that didn't stretch the skin so much as split it, like a mask pulled too tight. No movement, no breath, just watching me. I fell backward, hit the desk. My flashlight clattered and rolled, spinning the beam wildly. By the time I scrambled to the window, the face was gone. Not even footprints in the dirt outside. Just the woods. Still waiting. Then the whispering started again. Closer, around the cabin. Not just my name this time. Words, muted and clipped like a broken radio station just out of tune. Don't stay. Keep walking. My light dimmed again, flickered. I scanned the room for anything. Tools, radio, flare, anything. The desk had a drawer. I yanked it open. Inside was a tattered Ranger logbook, water-stained, moldy. The pages stuck together, but I forced it open. The entries were brief, desperate, paranoid. June 14th. Saw the same man again. Third time this week. Won't talk, just watches. June 16th. Heard the copy again. Voice sounded like me. It's learning. June 17th. Whatever's out there can't come in unless it's invited. That last sentence was underlined 3 times. I slammed the book shut, pulse hammering. Something slammed into the side of the shed, hard. The whole building groaned. Dust dropped from the ceiling. The walls shook like something was testing them. Again, another hit. This time from the back wall. I held my breath. Another blow, then knocking. 4 slow knocks. Polite, rhythmic, then silence. I don't know how long I stood there. Flashlight shaking in my hand. Minutes, maybe. Nothing happened. No more noises. Just the sound of my blood pounding in my skull. I backed away from the window, and that's when I heard the front door latch click open. Not forced, not broken, just flipped. Someone had unlocked it, from the outside. But I had locked it. I know I had. The door creaked open, just an inch, maybe 2. The beam of my flashlight caught something in the crack of the door. A hand, dirty, long-fingered, pressed against the edge. Just holding the door there, waiting. That's when I noticed something else. The smell was back. But this time, it was inside. I didn't move, didn't blink. Just stared at that hand gripping the doorframe like it was part of the wood. It didn't twitch, didn't press forward, just held still, as if it was waiting for permission. The thing, whatever it was, wanted me to open the door the rest of the way. I took a step back, slow and quiet, and nearly knocked over the cot behind me. I kept the flashlight aimed low, not wanting to shine it directly on the hand. Not yet. Part of me thought maybe if I didn't look straight at it, it wouldn't fully see me. My back hit the wall. The air had changed again, heavy and warm, like a furnace running behind rotting drywall. The scent now wasn't just decay. It was sweet, syrupy, like old meat left out too long under plastic wrap. My eyes watered. My throat clenched. And then the hand retreated, just like that. Slid back, slow and silent. The door stayed cracked open. That's when I made another mistake. I aimed the flashlight straight through the door. For less than a second, I caught it. The thing out there. A figure. Tall, maybe 6'4", but thin. So thin it looked like a Halloween decoration someone had left in the woods too long. Skin like stretched parchment, no clothes. The face, it was blank, but not featureless. The bones underneath moved, not the way faces normally move. This was like watching a mold shift from behind a curtain. Every few seconds, the cheekbones would push up unnaturally, like it was trying out different faces. And then it smiled. Not a reflex, not a human smile. The corners of its mouth pulled back too far, revealing more teeth than should have fit in a human skull. Sharp, flat, uneven. I fell back, flashlight scattering light across the floor. I scrambled for it, and the beam spun across the open door. Nothing. The figure was gone. I slammed the door shut, shoved the desk in front of it. My hands were shaking too badly. I could barely grip the drawer handle. I dug through it again, searching, praying for a flare or radio. There was only one thing left in the back corner. A knife. Old and rusted, but sharp enough. I clutched it in my right hand and waited. No sounds, no knocks, nothing, until I heard a voice from inside the room. It was me, Liam, exactly. My voice, exactly my tone. Coming from the far side of the cabin, the corner where the shadows were thickest. I raised the flashlight. There was a figure standing there, barely visible, back turned, shoulders hunched, same jacket as me, same boots. It was me standing completely still, back turned, breathing. I should have run, should have leapt through the damn window, but I couldn't move. The air felt glued to my skin. I could hear my own breath, except it wasn't mine. It was the thing in front of me, matching my rhythm. Inhale, exhale. I finally managed to whisper, "What are you?" The figure tilted its head, jerky, too far, like a puppet string being pulled wrong. And then it whispered something that didn't make sense, something that didn't come from my mouth. "I was you once." The light flickered again. When it came back on, the corner was empty. I didn't sleep that night. I sat against the wall, flashlight aimed at the door, knife in my lap. Every few minutes, I'd hear twigs snap outside, or footsteps, or breathing. Always just enough to keep me alert, just enough to let me know it hadn't left. At dawn, I finally dared to crack the door open. The forest was silent, and the smell was gone. I made it back to the main trail by noon. Nearly collapsed when I saw the first ranger sign. My GPS clicked back online like nothing had ever happened. When I got to the station, I filed an incident report. I left out the hallucinations, the mimic, the impossible cabin. But I couldn't stop thinking about the man who gave me the map. Why me? That night, I pulled out the old park survey maps from the archives, tried to find that section again. There was no record of that quadrant even existing, just an empty space on the map and a note scribbled in faded ink along the bottom margin. Do not assign patrols beyond mile marker 19. Nothing there to protect. Except there was something. It was still there, and now it knew my face. I took 2 weeks off, told my supervisor I needed mental health leave. He didn't argue, didn't ask questions, just nodded slowly, like he'd seen this before. Maybe he had. Back in town, I tried to live normal again. Sleep in my own bed, order takeout, watch garbage TV to drown out my thoughts. But every night around 3 a.m., I'd wake up drenched in sweat, convinced someone was standing at the edge of my bed. Not doing anything, just watching. And sometimes I'd hear footsteps in my hallway, slow, barefoot. Each time I jumped up, heart pounding, knife in hand, but there was no one there. No sign of a break-in, nothing on the security cam I installed facing my front door. But I swear to God, one night I checked the footage and saw something wrong. A frame. Just one frame of me standing on my own front porch, looking directly into the camera, wearing the uniform I hadn't put on since the forest. Same jacket, same mud-stained boots. I sat in the dark, staring at that frame for hours. That next morning, I made a choice I can't fully explain. A kind of instinct, a gut-deep pressure that said, "This won't stop until you go back." So I did. I didn't tell anyone. I left a note in my truck just in case I didn't make it out again. Bought a burner phone and a fresh compass, parked 5 miles from the edge of the tree line, and hiked in the rest. This time, I didn't bring a flashlight. I brought fire, 2 flares, a lighter, and a metal canister of kerosene. I figured if whatever this thing was didn't like light, it might hate fire even more. It took hours to find the same route. The trees looked different in daylight. No trail markers, no landmarks, but somehow I felt where I was supposed to go, like it was pulling me back, guiding me. By late afternoon, I was standing in the same clearing where I'd seen the hiker. Only now it was empty. No body, no pack, no stump carvings, like the whole thing had reset. But there was one thing left behind, a photo, pinned to a tree with a knife. It was a Polaroid, weathered and curled. I shouldn't have touched it. I knew better. But I did. It was a photo of me, taken from behind, walking into the forest. The timestamp read the exact date and time I'd arrived today. I staggered back, heart racing. That's when I heard it again. Not footsteps. My voice laughing, coming from the trees behind me. I spun around, flaring the lighter. Nothing. But the laugh didn't stop. It was echoing now, repeating, warped, like it had been recorded and played back wrong. Then I saw movement. Not in front of me, above me. I looked up and nearly dropped the lighter. There were things in the trees, dozens of them, hanging like cocoons wrapped in moss and fabric and old camping gear. Arms and legs sticking out at wrong angles. Some were moving, twitching gently in the breeze like they weren't quite dead. faces half covered, slack-jawed, open-eyed. I recognized two of them, the missing hikers from last season. Their posters were still up in the visitor center. And then one of them opened its eyes, locked onto mine. Mouth moved. One word, barely a whisper across the distance. Run. The forest exploded with sound, branches cracking, laughter. Hundreds of voices, all mimicking mine. Some wrong, some garbled, some sounding like they were dying. I grabbed the kerosene, splashed the base of the tree where the photo had been, lit the flare, and threw it. The tree went up in seconds. Flames roaring into the air, licking the hanging bodies. The laughter changed, not stopping, but twisting into screaming. Screams in my voice. The smoke poured into the clearing, thick and black and wet with something not just sap. I ran. I didn't look back. Not once. Somewhere along the way, I passed that collapsed ranger cabin again. Still there, still rotting. Only now smoke was leaking from its seams as if the fire had spread without touching it. I made it back to the ridge by nightfall, fell to my knees at the trail marker, vomited until there was nothing left in me. No one ever came looking. No one ever asked where I'd been. But that night, back in town, I got a text from an unknown number. No message, just an image, the same Polaroid. But this time, I was facing the camera, and I was smiling. I didn't sleep that night. I left every light on in the apartment, sat on the floor with my back against the fridge, knife in one hand, burner phone in the other. The photo still glowed on the screen. Me smiling. A smile too wide, too strained, not a grin, not even a smirk. It looked like someone had cut the shape of joy into my face. At exactly 3:13 a.m., the phone rang. No ringtone, just a vibrating hum and the word incoming call. Liam Donnelly. It was my own name. I answered. Static, wet and loud, like something heavy being dragged through gravel underwater. Then silence. Then from the earpiece, my own voice whispered, "Come back. I'm not finished yet." I threw the phone across the room and it shattered. The screen cracked. Battery popped out, but the call kept ringing. From the speaker, from nowhere. I packed that night, what little I had left. I didn't tell anyone where I was going. I knew they wouldn't believe me. Hell, I didn't believe me. But I couldn't stay, because whatever I'd brought back from the forest, it hadn't stayed in the trees. It was inside me now. I saw it in the mirror. At first, it was just a flicker. My reflection not quite matching my movements. A blink too slow. A smile when I wasn't smiling. But then it got worse. Sometimes I'd wake up standing in my hallway, shoes on, mud on the soles, and my front door wide open. One morning, I found a map on my kitchen table, the same one the stranger had given me, but with a new mark drawn in thick black ink. Not in the woods, in my neighborhood, right over my house. I left that night. Didn't pack. Just keys, wallet, a few $100 in cash. Slept in my car off a back road near the Idaho border. In the silence, I could still hear it. My voice behind the trees, laughing, choking, calling for help. It's been 3 months. I don't stay anywhere more than a day. Always keep moving. Gas stations, rest stops, campgrounds. I avoid the woods. I don't even look at them when I drive past because I know it's watching. Waiting. It doesn't matter where I go because something came back with me. And it wears my face. Sometimes, late at night when I check the rearview mirror, I see myself sitting in the back seat, smiling and whispering that same word over and over until the sound isn't a word anymore. It's a hole in my mind. Don't, but I did. And now I can't stop, because there's one last place on the map I haven't gone yet. One final mark circled in fresh red ink. It just appeared yesterday, and this time, the word next to it doesn't say don't. It says home. The moment our tires crunched on the gravel driveway of that rental near Mount Rainier, I knew this trip was going to be something else. I've always had a knack for sensing when things are about to turn sideways. Maybe it's the Montana in me, or maybe it's just because I've read too many creepy novels. Either way, as I looked out at the dense Washington forest that surrounded us, I felt an itch at the back of my mind. My friends were a mix of excitement and exhaustion as we unloaded our bags. Alex, the planner of our group, had found this place. "Guys, this is going to be epic." he said with a grin that was too wide to be just about the scenery. Sarah, the skeptic, rolled her eyes but couldn't hide her curiosity. And then there was Mark, always ready for anything, camera in hand. We were greeted by Michelle, our rental host, who had the rugged, weathered look of someone who'd spent her life outdoors. She was across the street tending to a horse in a pasture that seemed to stretch into infinity. "Welcome," she called out, her voice carrying a hint of something I couldn't quite place. Intrigue, maybe. We all walked over to greet her, eager to stretch our legs and get to know the place. Michelle had a way about her that was both disarming and slightly unnerving. She offered to show us around her property, and we eagerly agreed. The place was more than just a house. It was a slice of untouched wilderness, complete with more horses and a smattering of other animals. But it was when we crossed over to her backyard, past her quaint wooden house, that things started to get interesting. Michelle gathered us in a circle, her eyes glinting with a mix of mischief and excitement. "So, do you guys want to go back home with a story?" she asked, her voice dropping to a whisper. How could we say no? We followed her past a barn, walking into a part of her backyard that was more forest than garden. The ground was soft underfoot, the air thick with the scent of pine and earth. About 100 feet in, Michelle stopped. "Stop. Look down," she instructed. At our feet was a footprint, but not just any footprint. It was massive, easily twice the size of my own, and oddly shaped, wider and longer than any humans could be. And there were toe imprints, clear as day. "This," Michelle said, a serious tone replacing her earlier playfulness, "was made by a Sasquatch." A Sasquatch. The word hung in the air like a challenge. I glanced at my friends and saw their expressions mirror my own, a mix of disbelief and curiosity. Michelle went on to tell us how she found the imprint, and then, almost as an afterthought, how she had come to own this land and the property across the street where we were staying. Her voice took on a somber note. "You might think I'm crazy, but if I knew about their existence, I would have never moved here. Do you want to see more?" There was a collective pause, a moment where we all considered the sanity of following this path. But adventure has a way of tipping the scales. We nodded, and Michelle led us deeper into the woods. As we walked, the forest seemed to close in around us. The chirping of birds and the rustling of leaves were the only sounds that accompanied our footsteps. I felt a shiver run down my spine, the kind you get when you realize you're part of a story much bigger than yourself. And as the shadows lengthened around us, I couldn't shake the feeling that we were not alone. We ventured further into the dense Washington woods. I felt an uneasiness creep up my spine. I've been in plenty of wild places, but there was something about these woods, shrouded in twilight, that felt different. The trees loomed over us like silent giants, their branches casting long, strange shadows that danced in the breeze. Michelle led us with a confidence that only comes from someone who knows every inch of their land. She was part guide, part storyteller, weaving a narrative that was as captivating as it was unsettling. We were deep in her territory now, far from the comforts of the rental. "Here," Michelle said, stopping suddenly. She pointed at the ground to a cluster of sticks. They were arranged in a way that was too deliberate to be the work of nature. "I laid these out earlier today. Look how they've been moved." We circled around the sticks, the air thick with intrigue. The arrangement was peculiar, like a cryptic message left by an unknown hand. Michelle's theory was that the Sasquatch were mischievous creatures, fond of small pranks like this. It was hard to digest, but out here in the embrace of the wilderness, anything seemed possible. As we walked on, I couldn't shake off the feeling of being watched. The forest had a presence, a personality almost. It was as if the trees themselves were alive with secrets, whispering tales of the unknown. Michelle's next words sent a chill down my spine. "Right about here is where you might feel something unusual," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. And she was right. The air around us felt charged, electric. The hair on my arms stood on end. And I wasn't the only one. Alex looked around nervously, and even Sarah, our group skeptic, seemed uneasy. "They asked me to bring you here," Michelle continued, her voice taking on a solemn tone. The Sasquatch, I mean. They wanted to say hello. I tried to process her words. Were we really being summoned by a legendary creature, or was this all an elaborate ruse? But before I could ponder further, Michelle posed a question that cut through the silence like a knife. Has any of you recently lost a brother, or experienced psychic abilities? We exchanged glances, each of us shaking our heads. The question hung in the air, adding to the thickening plot of our little adventure. Our journey took us to the last point of our walk. Michelle's eyes widened as she examined another set of sticks. I can't believe it, she murmured. Earlier, she had laid them out, and now they were rearranged, just like the first set. She spoke of how she often left gifts for the Sasquatch, food mostly, and how they always disappeared. I was skeptical, to say the least. I've spent enough time in the wild to know that plenty of creatures could be responsible for missing food. But there was something in Michelle's conviction that made me question my doubts. Just when I thought things couldn't get any stranger, we heard it. A sound that defied description. It was distant but clear. A bizarre chorus of hoots and laughs unlike anything I've ever heard. Michelle's face lit up. That's them, she said with certainty. The Sasquatch. We stood there in the heart of the forest, listening to the haunting melody of the wild. It was a moment suspended in time, a crossroads between the known and the unknown. As we made our way back to the cabin, the forest seemed to whisper its secrets, leaving us with more questions than answers. Back at the rental, the night had wrapped itself around the cabin like a dark, enigmatic blanket. We sat on the porch, nursing our drinks, each lost in thought. The conversation swirled around our bizarre encounter, theories tossed back and forth like a game of catch. Alex was all in, buying every word Michelle had said. Sarah remained skeptical, her brows knitted in doubt. And Mark, well, he seemed more interested in capturing the perfect night shot of the woods than joining our debate. The thing about the wilderness is, it has a way of stripping down your beliefs, leaving you raw and open to possibilities you'd scoff at in the light of day. And right then, under the vast starry sky, I felt that vulnerability. I'm going back out there, declared Alex suddenly, his voice cutting through the night. I have to see this for myself. Mark, ever the adventurer, didn't hesitate to join him. I watched them disappear into the tree line, their flashlights bobbing like will-o'-the-wisps in the darkness. Left alone, I felt a strange sense of solitude. I wasn't up for chasing shadows in the woods. Instead, I rolled a joint and settled into the quiet, letting the serene beauty of the Washington wilderness wash over me. The cabin, with its warm lights and rustic charm, felt like a sanctuary. But the stillness of the night was deceptive. As I sat there, lost in the tranquility, it happened again. That sound, distant but unmistakable. The eerie, almost otherworldly call that Michelle had attributed to the Sasquatch. It started as an owl's hoot, morphing into that bizarre monkey-like laughter. I froze, every instinct screaming that this wasn't just some nocturnal animal. There was an intelligence in that sound, a deliberate communication that transcended the barriers of the known world. I wanted to dismiss it, to rationalize it as the trickery of the night. But sitting there alone in the vastness of the wilderness, I couldn't. Time seemed to stretch on endlessly, the sound echoing in my mind long after it had faded away. When Alex and Mark finally returned, I relayed my experience, but they hadn't heard anything. Their skepticism was evident, and I couldn't blame them. If I hadn't heard it with my own ears, I might have been skeptical too. The night wore on, and eventually we retreated to the warmth of the cabin. But sleep was elusive. I lay in bed, my mind racing with questions. What were those sounds? Was Michelle playing an elaborate prank, or was there something more to her stories? Driven by a restless curiosity, I grabbed my phone and did what any modern-day seeker of truth would do. I Googled, Washington State creepy laugh animal. The first result was an article titled, Bigfoot or Animals? Hair-raising sounds coming from a swamp on Indian reservation in Oregon. My heart skipped a beat. The description matched what I had heard perfectly. As I lay there staring into the darkness, I realized that the wilderness holds more mysteries than we can fathom. And sometimes the line between legend and reality is thinner than we dare to believe. Morning in the Washington wilderness is like waking up in a different world. The light filters through the trees in a soft golden haze, painting everything in a hue of tranquility. But that morning, as I sat on the porch with a steaming cup of coffee, the beauty of the surroundings was overshadowed by the lingering questions from the previous night. The article I had found about the Bigfoot sounds in Oregon was still open on my phone. I reread it, searching for some clue, some rational explanation. But the words just danced around the possibility of the unknown, offering no concrete answers. Alex and Mark were the first to join me, their steps heavy with the lack of any real discovery from their nocturnal expedition. Sarah followed, her skepticism now mixed with a tinge of curiosity. We sat there in silence, each of us lost in our own thoughts. The conversation from last night resumed, but with a different tone. Now, there was a sense of wonder, a willingness to entertain the idea that maybe, just maybe, there was more to Michelle's stories than we had initially believed. It was time to leave the cabin, to say goodbye to the mystery that had enveloped us for the past couple of days. We packed our things, the mood subdued. The encounter with the unknown had touched each of us in different ways, leaving a mark that wouldn't easily fade. As we loaded the car, Michelle appeared. Her demeanor was the same as when we first met her, a mix of the earthly and the ethereal. "I hope you found what you were looking for," she said, her eyes twinkling with unspoken knowledge. We exchanged farewells, but her words stayed with me. Had we found what we were looking for, or had we stumbled upon a mystery that was never meant to be solved? The drive back was quiet, each mile taking us further away from the enigmatic woods and back to our reality. But the wilderness has a way of staying with you, its mystery seeping into your soul. In the days that followed, I found myself diving deeper into the lore of the Sasquatch, reading accounts, watching documentaries. The skeptic in me battled with the part that had heard those unexplainable sounds in the dark. The rational part of my brain argued for logic, but the primal part, the part that had sat alone on that porch, knew that some things defy explanation. I realized then that the wilderness is more than just trees and wildlife. It's a living, breathing entity filled with secrets and stories that go back centuries. And sometimes it chooses to reveal a glimpse of its mysteries, not to provide answers, but to remind us that there are things in this world beyond our understanding. As I sat at my desk, the city noises a stark contrast to the serene silence of the woods. I knew the experience would stay with me. The line between legend and reality might be blurred, but sometimes the mystery is more important than the truth. In the end, our Sasquatch experience in Washington State was a journey into the unknown, a reminder of the vast and unexplored mysteries that lie hidden in the heart of the wilderness. This trail has been closed since 1986. I found out why. I've been a park ranger for almost 5 years now, and I thought I'd seen everything. Drunken campers, lost hikers, black bears pawing through dumpsters, even the occasional cryptic scratch mark on tree trunks that someone swore was from a mountain lion, despite the fact that we haven't had those around here in decades. But last month, I found something that's been gnawing at my brain ever since. It was late October, just before the snow really starts coming down in the northern Rockies. I was pulling solo duty at Pine Haven National Park, a massive stretch of wilderness in Montana that doesn't get nearly as many visitors as places like Glacier or Yellowstone. It's quieter, less polished, and honestly, it's my favorite post. That night, I was supposed to patrol the Eastern Ridge trails, make sure no idiots were sneaking into camp without permits. We'd had issues before, college kids from Missoula thinking they're invincible, ignoring the warnings about early snow, or worse, the missing persons reports that still trickled in every couple of years. I was finishing up my thermos of gas station coffee, sitting in the cracked leather seat of the Ranger truck, when the radio crackled. "Unit 4, you copy." I grabbed the mic. "Yeah, this is 4. "Hey, got a report of a light on the Elk Ridge Trail. Thought you should check it out before you clock out." Probably nothing. My stomach sank. Elk Ridge had been officially closed since 1986 after a rockslide wiped out a good chunk of the switchbacks. The park never reopened it. Too unstable, they said. But every now and then, you'd hear stories. Strange figures spotted near the trailhead, weird noises coming from that part of the park at night. Hikers who got turned around and ended up back there and didn't come out. "Copy that," I said, trying to sound casual, though I felt my fingers tense up on the steering wheel. I headed east, bumping along the dirt road, pine trees crowding in on both sides. The further I drove, the more isolated it felt, the kind of isolation that makes your skin crawl. I couldn't help but glance in the rearview mirror every so often, half expecting to see headlights behind me, though I knew no one else should be out here. When I reached the Elk Ridge trailhead, I killed the engine and stepped out. The wind cut through my uniform, sharp and cold, and I pulled my jacket tighter. The place was choked with overgrowth, thorny brush curling over what was once a well-maintained path. Wooden signs, long rotted and splintered, some sagging to the ground. And then I saw it. A flicker of orange light maybe 50 yards up the trail, just past a bend. I told myself it was probably a lost hiker with a lantern or a flashlight. Maybe even some dumb teens trying to scare each other. I radioed back, told them I was going in to check it out. As I made my way up the trail, the crunch of gravel and dead leaves under my boots sounded impossibly loud. I kept glancing over my shoulder, swearing I heard faint shuffling behind me. But every time I turned, the woods stood still, dark and unmoving. The light stayed steady ahead, just out of reach, like it was leading me deeper in. I should have turned back. Instead, I kept moving. About 20 minutes up, the trail narrowed. I rounded a sharp curve where the trees thinned slightly, and that's when I saw him. A man standing by what looked like the collapsed remains of an old wooden bridge. He was facing away from me, motionless, wearing what looked like a ranger's uniform, or at least what used to be a ranger's uniform. The fabric was faded, sun-bleached, the sleeves shredded. His boots were caked with mud, one laced, the other flopping open like he'd forgotten how to tie it. "Hey," I called out, trying to sound firm, though my throat felt tight. "This trail's closed. You all right?" He didn't turn, didn't even flinch. The lantern at his feet burned with that strange, steady glow, not flickering like a regular flame, more like a dim, constant beam. I took a cautious step closer, hand instinctively moving to the radio clipped on my shoulder. "Sir, you need to come with me. This area's off limits." Still nothing. And then his head jerked like he'd been yanked by invisible strings, twisting slightly toward me, but not all the way. I couldn't see his face clearly. Just the outline of a sunken cheek, a mouth half open. His jaw twitched once, then again, like he was trying to speak but couldn't form words. That's when I noticed the patch on his shoulder, Pine Haven Ranger Service. But the logo, it was the old design, the one they stopped using decades ago, and his name tag, barely hanging on by a thread, read Murray. I know that name. I've seen it in the break room on a faded, yellowed missing persons notice from 1986. Ranger Charles Murray disappeared during a routine patrol on Elk Ridge Trail. Never found. Presumed dead. I stumbled back, heart hammering in my chest, and then he turned fully. I can't describe his face, not really. It wasn't rotted, not like a corpse, but it wasn't right either. His skin looked wrong, like wax left too close to a fire, sagging and warped. His eyes were wide, glassy, and his mouth hung open just enough to reveal cracked, dark teeth. He lifted one arm, pointing past me down the trail. His hand trembled violently, and when he finally spoke, his voice came out like a rasping whisper. "Turn back." I didn't wait. I ran. I didn't look back, not until I was nearly to the truck, lungs burning, vision swimming. When I finally dared to glance over my shoulder, the trail was empty. The light was gone. The woods stood silent and dark as if nothing had ever been there. I drove back to the ranger station, shaking so hard I almost clipped a tree on the way down. I didn't report what I saw. I told them there was no one up there. No lights. Nothing. But the next night, when I was alone in the office, I went to the old records. I pulled Murray's file, and I found something I wish I hadn't. Scrawled on the last page, barely legible, was a note from the original search team. Do not reopen Elk Ridge. If anyone sees lights or hears the name Murray, tell them to leave. Do not let them follow. I don't know what's up there. I just know I'm never going back. That night, even after I got home, small, creaky apartment above the old bakery in town, I just sat on the edge of the bed, boots still on, jacket still zipped up. My hands wouldn't stop shaking. I kept replaying it over and over, that sagging face, those trembling fingers pointing, that voice like dry leaves scraping across the ground. Turn back. God. By morning, I convinced myself I'd imagined it. Maybe it was exhaustion, long shift, thin mountain air, maybe even leftover adrenaline. I hadn't eaten much that day, hadn't drunk enough water. Rangers sometimes joked about trail madness, the way your mind plays tricks on you when you're alone too long in the woods. I wanted to believe that's all it was. But then the messages started. The first came through the park's central radio midday. Unit 4, check in. I pressed the mic. 4 here. We got another report, dispatch crackled back. Hikers said they saw a ranger up by the old Elk Ridge overlook. My stomach dropped. That can't be right, I said, trying to keep my voice calm. That trail's blocked. No one should be up there. That's what we told them, but they were pretty insistent. Said the guy was in uniform, waving them down. I almost dropped the mic. My fingers felt ice cold. I'll take a look. I didn't want to go. Every bone in my body screamed at me to turn off the radio, make up an excuse, do anything else. But I'd been a ranger long enough to know you can't ignore a call. So I went. The drive out was even worse this time. The air felt heavier, like the sky was pressing down on the forest. My ears kept popping the way they do when you're gaining elevation, except I wasn't. I was heading across a familiar flat stretch. It was like the pressure was wrong somehow, like the atmosphere was off just around that part of the park. I reached the overlook trailhead by late afternoon. It was quiet, way too quiet. Usually, you hear at least some bird chatter, maybe the distant knock of a woodpecker, squirrels rustling in the underbrush. Today, nothing, just dead air. I stepped onto the path, moving slow, boots crunching through frostbitten leaves. The trees here were old, towering lodgepole pines mixed with ancient Douglas fir, their bark blackened and scarred from wildfires decades past. The trail twisted ahead, pale and narrow, half swallowed by creeping vines and roots. About halfway up, I saw it. A boot print. Fresh. Not from a hiker. Too heavy. Too wide. More like a work boot. Ranger issue. My heartbeat spiked. I crouched down, fingers brushing the dirt. There was a faint drag mark too, like whoever made the print had stumbled or limped. I followed the trail carefully, every step feeling like I was walking into a trap. The light was fading fast. Twilight in the woods is a strange thing. Shadows thicken, and everything feels closer, tighter, like the trees are leaning in to listen. At the crest of the ridge, I spotted something through the branches. A figure. Not moving, just standing there. I raised my voice. Hey, park ranger here? Are you all right? The figure didn't react. I forced myself forward, closer. Now I could see he was facing away, just like before. Same uniform, old design, patch barely hanging on, same muddy boots. It was him. Murray, I called out, throat dry. The figure twitched. My breath hitched. I took a shaky step back, instinct roaring in my chest. And then, in a voice like brittle paper, you shouldn't be here. I wanted to run. God, I wanted to turn and run, but my legs locked up. My mouth opened, trying to form words, but nothing came out. He turned slightly, enough that I could see the ruined edge of his face, cracked skin, sunken eyes, the corners of his mouth torn upward in a grotesque, slack smile. Go back. And then, behind him, deeper in the trees, something moved. I don't know what it was. I couldn't see it clearly. Just a shape, tall, thin, gliding between the pines, barely making a sound. My brain scrambled, trying to make sense of it. Another person? An animal? But no, it was too tall, too smooth. Almost human, but not. I stumbled backward, heart hammering against my ribs. Murray's head snapped toward the movement, and for the first time, I saw something flicker across his ruined face. Panic. He lifted one arm, pointing frantically at me. Go. That broke the spell. I turned and ran. I don't remember the sprint back down the trail. I don't remember the drive. I just remember bursting into the ranger station, slamming the door behind me, chest heaving, lungs on fire. One of the other rangers, Sarah, looked up from her paperwork. "Jesus, you look like hell. What happened?" I tried to speak, but all I could manage was a broken, breathless whisper. "Something's up there." She frowned, confused. "On Elk Ridge? I thought you said it was just a dead trail." I shook my head. "No, there's something on that mountain." She opened her mouth, probably to tell me to calm down, but just then the radio crackled. "Unit 4, come in." It was dispatch. I snatched up the mic. "This is 4. A pause. Then, in a voice I swear to God sounded just like mine, distorted and slow. "Don't leave." I dropped the mic. Sarah's face went pale. We both just stared at each other. The static from the radio filled the room, the words echoing in the back of my skull. "Don't leave." I didn't sleep that night either. And I knew, deep in my gut, this wasn't over. I didn't go into work the next day. I told them I was sick, called Sarah early, voice shaking, said I had chills, fever, whatever I could think of. She sounded surprised but didn't push. Honestly, I think she was relieved. Maybe she thought I needed a break after the weirdness yesterday. But the truth is, I didn't want to be anywhere near the park. I stayed holed up in my apartment, blinds drawn, sitting on the couch with the TV on, just for background noise. Netflix played some dumb cooking show on loop, but I wasn't watching. I just sat there staring at the wall, replaying everything over and over. Murray's face, that thing behind him moving through the trees, the voice on the radio. My voice, warped and slow, telling me, "Don't leave." By evening, I thought maybe I was cracking up. I even Googled stress-induced hallucinations, paranoia, auditory distortions, anything to explain what was happening. Maybe it was burnout, or maybe I just spent too much time alone in the woods. I was halfway convincing myself of that when my phone buzzed. Unknown number. Against my better judgment, I answered. "Hello?" At first, just static. Then a faint voice, barely audible over the hiss. "Come back." I slammed the phone down so hard it bounced off the coffee table. I didn't sleep again. By 3 a.m., I was pacing the apartment, sweaty, jittery, jumping at every creak and car passing outside. I knew I couldn't stay like this. I needed answers. And there was only one place I was going to get them. By dawn, I was driving back toward Pine Haven. I kept telling myself I wasn't going to do anything stupid. I'd just swing by the ranger station, pull the old files, maybe talk to some of the senior guys. Hell, maybe I'd even tell Sarah what was going on. She'd seen how shaken I was. Maybe she'd believe me. But as soon as I pulled into the lot, I saw the station door hanging open. My stomach knotted. I killed the engine, stepped out carefully, listening. The place was quiet, except for the soft rattle of the wind through the flagpole. "Hello?" I called softly. "Sarah?" No answer. Inside, the lights were flickering. Papers were scattered across the floor. Chairs knocked over. Someone's coffee mug lay shattered on the ground. Dark liquid pooled beneath. I edged toward the back office, where we kept the records. My boots crunched softly over the mess. I reached for the handle and froze. On the door, scratched deep into the wood, were the words, "Stay away from the ridge." My breath hitched. I pushed inside. The office was a disaster zone. Filing cabinets yanked open, folders whipped apart. But one thing caught my eye. An old cardboard box shoved into the corner, half buried under loose files. I dragged it out. Inside were photographs, yellowed, curling at the edges. Black and white shots of the park from decades ago. Rangers standing proudly at trailheads. Groups posing near waterfalls. Smiling faces by the old ranger station that had burned down years ago. And then, near the bottom, I found something different. A photo of Murray. He looked younger, clean-shaven, smiling awkwardly at the camera, one hand resting on a tree trunk. But behind him, just barely visible, was a shadow. Not a trick of the light. Not a person. A shape. Tall, thin, smooth. Almost human. I felt a cold sweat break out down my back. My fingers trembled as I pulled out another photo. This one from a search party. Rangers standing in a line, flashlights pointed into the dark, faces tense. Again, in the distance, the shape, watching. I slammed the box shut. That's when I heard the bang. I spun, heart hammering. The front door of the station was swinging open, slamming hard against the wall in the wind. No, not the wind. A figure stood just outside. I barely saw it. Just a flash. Ranger uniform, faded, ragged, face pale and sunken. Murray. He stood there, half shrouded in shadow, one hand raised, trembling. I could barely hear it, but his lips moved. Behind you. I turned, chest clenching, and saw for the briefest moment the reflection in the office window. Tall, thin, smooth, no face, no eyes. It was right behind me. I didn't think. I bolted, ran straight out the back door through the trees, stumbling over roots and brush, branches clawing at my arms and face. I didn't stop. I didn't look back. I just ran. By the time I reached my truck, my breath was coming in sharp, ragged gasps. I fumbled with the keys, heart pounding so hard it felt like it was about to crack my ribs open. When I finally peeled out of the lot, tires skidding over gravel, I dared a glance back at the station. Empty. No figure. No shadow. But just as I turned onto the main road, I saw something in the rearview mirror. For a split second, standing at the edge of the trees. Tall, thin, smooth. Watching. I don't know what it wants, but I know it's not done with me yet. I didn't go home. After I tore out of the Pine Haven lot, I just kept driving. Past the park boundary, past the small grocery store where the locals buy their bait and beer. Past the gas station that always smells like burnt coffee. I didn't even know where I was headed. I just needed to move. By the time I stopped, I was 2 hours south in a Walmart parking lot, hands shaking on the steering wheel, chest tight like I'd been holding my breath the entire drive. I sat there as the sun dipped behind the mountains, watching families shuffle in and out of the store, listening to the faint, hollow hum of some teenager's bass-heavy music thumping from a nearby car. It should have felt normal. It should have been comforting. But it wasn't. Even here, surrounded by people, I felt it. Like something was standing just out of sight, just beyond the corners of my vision, watching, waiting. I pulled out my phone, scrolling aimlessly, looking for something to ground me. I even pulled up Murray's missing person file again, rereading the details, like maybe I'd missed something. Patrol gone wrong, radioed in his location, never returned, declared missing after 48 hours. Except they did find something. I dug back into the search reports I'd photographed earlier, flicking through the images until I found the small, crumpled note they'd logged. Do not let anyone follow. What the hell did that mean? Was Murray warning me? Or was he part of this? Now I sat there, the question swirling in my brain like dirty water down a drain, until my phone buzzed in my hand. Unknown number. Again. I froze for a long moment, just staring at the screen. The little green accept button seemed to pulse like a heartbeat. Against every ounce of common sense, I answered. Hello? No static this time, just breathing. Slow, shallow, wet sounding. Then a whisper, low and cracked, like someone speaking through a broken mouth. You're already marked. My stomach lurched. I hung up so fast I nearly dropped the phone. For a few minutes, I just sat there shaking, trying to slow my breathing. I wanted to call someone, a friend, another ranger, even the sheriff. But who the hell would believe me? Hi! Yeah! I think a dead ranger and some faceless thing are following me. Yeah, that'd go over well. Instead, I forced myself to think. If whatever this was had attached itself to me, how did I break it? The only thing that made sense was going back. I didn't want to. God, I did not want to. But if I just kept running, how long before it found me anyway? I waited until full dark before I turned the truck around. The highway back to Pine Haven was a black ribbon winding through endless pine and spruce. Every now and then, headlights from an oncoming car would flash by, momentarily lighting the trees, making me jump every time I thought I saw movement at the edge of the road. By midnight, I was back at the park boundary. The gates were closed. I parked the truck, killed the engine, and stepped out into the cold. The wind whispered through the trees, sending dry needles skittering across the pavement. Somewhere far off, a lone owl called. The rest was silence. I climbed the locked gate, boots slipping slightly on the icy metal, and dropped down on the other side. The park stretched out ahead, dark and still. My breath puffed out in clouds as I hiked toward the trailhead. And then, a light just ahead. Flickering orange. Lantern light. I crept forward slowly, heart pounding in my chest, every instinct screaming at me to stop. And there he was, Murray, standing at the mouth of the Elk Ridge Trail, same tattered uniform, same ruined face. He raised one hand, trembling, and for the first time I saw his eyes clearly. They were wide, terrified, not at me, but at something behind him. He mouthed one word, "Run." And then I heard it, a dragging sound like something impossibly tall sliding through the trees, not walking, not stepping, gliding. I stumbled back, but my boot slipped on the frost and I hit the ground hard, breath knocked from my lungs. From where I lay, I could just barely see past Murray, and in the shadows beyond, it was there. The shape, tall, thin, smooth, no face, no eyes, no mouth, but I felt it watching me. It raised one long, impossibly thin arm and pointed not at me, at Murray. Murray turned sharply, mouth opening in a silent scream, and in an instant he was gone, like smoke sucked into a vacuum. No sound, no flash, just gone. I scrambled to my feet, sprinting back toward the gate, lungs burning, legs shaking. I could hear it behind me. Not footsteps, but a pressure. A pull, like the very air was bending, warping, chasing. I didn't stop until I hit the gate, nearly falling as I climbed over, tearing my jacket on the barbed top. When I landed on the other side, I didn't look back. I ran straight for the truck, slammed the door, and peeled out onto the highway, tires screeching. And for a long time, I just drove. I don't remember how long, maybe hours, maybe all night. But by the time I stopped, the sun was just starting to rise, pink and gold creeping over the mountains. I sat there shaking, staring at my reflection in the rearview mirror. And for a moment, just a moment, I thought I saw something move in the back seat. But when I turned, the seat was empty. I don't know what it wants, but I don't think I left it behind. I didn't go home. I couldn't. The thought of stepping into my dark, narrow apartment, drawing the blinds, turning off the lights, it made my skin crawl. I kept picturing that empty space behind me in the rearview mirror, imagining the faintest shift of a shadow, the slightest creak of floorboards under weight that shouldn't be there. So I drove, all morning, all afternoon. I pulled through Starbucks twice, not because I was hungry, but because the chatter of the workers, the hiss of the espresso machine, the ambient noise, it made me feel normal for brief moments. I didn't tell anyone. Not Sarah, not my supervisor, not the sheriff. Hell, not even the guy at the drive-through window who gave me a second cup by mistake and joked, "Long night, huh?" If I opened my mouth, it all comes spilling out. And I didn't know how to explain it without sounding insane. By early evening, I found myself parked outside a Walmart again, this time in a neighboring town. I watched shoppers push carts stacked with bottled water, toilet paper, snacks, garden mulch, just everyday, boring stuff. I craved that mundanity like oxygen. My phone buzzed, blocked number. I squeezed it in my hand so hard I thought the screen would crack. My thumb hovered over the decline button, but I didn't press it. It stopped ringing. And then a text. "You can't run." No punctuation, no capital letters. I felt bile rise in my throat. I shut the phone off and tossed it onto the passenger seat, forcing myself to breathe. My hands were shaking again, a fine, uncontrollable tremor. I ran my palms over my face, willing myself to think, to do something. I didn't know what. Then, tap, tap, tap. I jolted. Someone was at the window. A man, mid-40s maybe. Scruffy beard, wearing a green hiking jacket and cargo pants. He smiled awkwardly when I jumped, holding up both hands like, "Sorry, sorry." I cracked the window. "Hey, sorry, man," he said, voice a little hoarse. "Didn't mean to startle you." "It's fine," I mumbled. "Just, are you a ranger?" His eyes flicked to the gear on my passenger seat, the Pine Haven jacket, the radio, the battered park map. "Yeah," I said warily. His face shifted, lips tightening. "You were at Pine Haven last night, weren't you?" My stomach dropped. "How do you know that?" "I was there too." He glanced around as if checking who was nearby. Saw the light up on Elk Ridge. Saw something else too. I stared at him, pulse hammering in my ears. He leaned in slightly. "I don't know what you saw, man, but it's following me too." A rush of cold hit my spine. We sat there in silence for a second. I looked him over, trying to gauge if this was some weird joke or a desperate, grasping truth. His eyes were bloodshot, rimmed dark with exhaustion. His hands gripping the window edge trembled faintly. "What did you see?" I asked quietly. His jaw worked. "I don't even know. I was hiking up near the old trail, heard something moving, saw a lantern. I thought maybe someone was lost. But then—" He stopped, swallowing hard. "I ran," he finished. "I've been running since." A thought hit me, sharp, electric, terrifying. If he was marked too, maybe we could figure this out together. Maybe we weren't completely alone in this. I killed the engine, unlocked the door, and stepped out. "Let's talk," I said. He nodded, glancing nervously over his shoulder. Yeah, okay. My car is just over here." I followed him, heart pounding, every nerve on edge. We crossed the parking lot toward a dusty gray Subaru parked under one of the flickering overhead lights. He fumbled with his keys, hands shaking worse now, and I caught the faintest tremor in his voice as he said, "I don't know how to stop this, man. I haven't slept in 2 days. I keep thinking." Click. He unlocked the door, and that's when I saw it through the back window in the reflection. It was standing behind us. Tall, thin, smooth. No face. My throat closed up, and before I could even yell, he turned just in time to see it. His mouth opened, but no sound came out. The thing raised one arm, long and jointless, pointing, not at him, not at me, but at the car. For one awful moment, I saw his face twist in realization, sheer, unfiltered terror. And then, like smoke in the wind, he was gone. Just gone. His keys clattered to the ground. The only sound in the empty lot. I staggered back, chest heaving, heart in my throat. I wanted to scream, wanted to run, but my legs locked. The thing didn't move. It just stood there, watching, waiting, and then it raised its hand again, this time pointing at me. My vision blurred, and a roaring sound filled my head like rushing water. My knees buckled, and I dropped to the ground, gasping, clawing at the pavement as if I could hold onto the world. And then, as suddenly as it started, it was gone. The lot was empty. The Subaru sat there unlocked, abandoned. And I was alone. Alone, but marked. I don't remember how I got back to the truck. I don't remember starting the engine or pulling onto the road or even driving the first 20 miles. I just remember the feeling, that hollow, ringing emptiness inside my chest, like something had been scooped out of me. Like my body was running on fumes, the shell of a person just barely holding together. By the time I realized where I was going, the sign was already in front of me. Pine Haven National Park, closed for winter season. The gates loomed up, chains tangled around the bars. I sat there in the cab, watching the trees sway in the wind, headlights carving faint shapes in the underbrush. I knew it was a trap. I knew going back was insane. But what was the alternative? Keep running until it took me? Sit in some motel room until I faded out like the man in the Walmart lot? I stepped out of the truck. The cold hit me like a slap, sharp and biting, but it barely registered. My fingers worked numbly at the gate, pulling at the chains until they gave just enough for me to slip through. And then I was walking back toward Elk Ridge, back toward the trail that had been closed since 1986. The woods were silent, except for the faint whisper of wind. My boots crunched over the frostbitten dirt, the air sharp in my lungs. Every step felt heavier, like something was pressing against me. Not just the cold, not just the fear, but something bigger, thicker. Like the very air was closing in. I reached the mouth of the trail, and there, waiting, was Murray. Same sunken eyes, same tattered uniform, same trembling hand raised in warning. But this time I didn't stop. I stepped closer. His mouth opened, jaw shaking, that voice scraping out like dry leaves. "You can't." I shook my head. "I don't have a choice." His hand dropped. His shoulders sagged like some invisible weight had crushed the last bit of fight out of him. And then slowly, he turned. He walked ahead, lantern flickering dimly in his hand, leading me up the trail. I followed. We climbed higher, past the broken switchbacks, past the dead trees and overgrown brush, until we reached the ridge. The wind howled here, sharp and endless, rattling through the burned-out trees. And waiting at the top it stood, tall, thin, smooth. No face, no mouth, no eyes, but I felt its gaze lock onto me. For a moment, Murray stood between us, lantern shaking, shoulders tense, and then the thing lifted one long, jointless arm and pointed, not at me, at him. Murray's body jerked, head snapping up, mouth opening in a silent scream as his form began to unravel, pieces fading like ash in the wind. I lunged forward instinctively, reaching out. No, but my hand passed straight through him, catching only cold, empty air. In a heartbeat, he was gone, just like the others. And then the thing turned its hand, pointing at me. I fell to my knees, chest heaving, heart slamming so hard I thought my ribs would crack open. I could feel it pulling at me, the same unraveling force, the same hollow emptiness creeping into my bones. But then a voice, low, faint, right by my ear. Run. I don't know how. I don't know where the strength came from, but my legs moved. I ran. I ran like hell, stumbling, crashing through the underbrush, breath burning in my throat. Behind me, I could feel the air twisting, warping, the forest bending in impossible ways. Trees groaned and split. The ground seemed to ripple under my feet. But I ran, all the way back down the ridge, all the way through the forest, all the way to the truck. I didn't look back. I couldn't look back. When I finally reached the truck, I slammed the door shut, fumbled the keys, and peeled out onto the main road, driving faster than I ever have in my life. The forest fell away behind me, dark and silent. I didn't stop, not until I crossed the county line. Not until I saw the familiar glow of gas stations, fast food joints, Walmart, Costco, the real world bleeding back in, grounding me. But even now, even as I sit here in a crowded McDonald's parking lot, surrounded by people, music, lights, I can still feel it. Watching, waiting. I don't know why it hasn't finished the job. I don't know if it's done with me. But I know one thing. I'll never go back. Not to Pine Haven, not to Elk Ridge, not to that trail. Because some places, they were never meant to be reopened. I've been a fire lookout for about a year now. I spend most of my life alone in a small, window-lined, one-room shack atop a steel and wood-frame tower in the middle of the Great Smoky Mountains National Park. My only companions are my collection of cheap novels, a laptop computer with infrequent and unreliable internet service, and the two-way radio I use to communicate with the few nearby towers and ranger stations. Nearby is a bit of a misnomer, though. Using my high-powered binoculars, I can just barely make out Tower 12 on a clear day, situated several miles to my west. Tower 15, the next nearest to my location, only appears as a glint of sunlight to my east when the sun catches it just right. I've been told the Parks Department intends to put up some additional towers in this area as soon as it gets the necessary funding, which is probably no time soon. That's fine with me, though. I like the solitude. It helps quiet my mind, keeps the memories at bay. Mostly, I occupy my days either with simple maintenance in and around the tower or scanning the dense trees all around me for any signs of trouble. It's been a dry year, so the threat of fire is a constant one. This particular afternoon, I was clearing some brush from around the base of the tower that had begun to encroach on the fire road leading back to the nearby ranger station 20 miles away. Even with the heavy suspension of the government-issued Jeep, the road was a harsh ride at the best of times. I had just finished dragging some brush cuttings off into the tree line when the radio clipped to my belt squawked. Tower 9. This is Tower 12. Do you copy? It was Billy Johnson, my supervisor. Nice enough guy, I suppose. Tended to leave me alone most of the time. I straightened up and stretched my back, wiping the sweat from my eyes with my forearm and keyed the microphone attached to my shoulder. Go for Tower 9, I replied as I replaced the shears and bow saw into the small storage shed near the base of the stairs. John, do you have eyes on a bit of smoke north of your position? Stand by, Billy, I said, snatching up my water bottle and jogging to the metal staircase that wound its way around the tower. I didn't bother locking the 8-foot chain-link fence surrounding my little compound. Chances were, I'd be back soon enough. Reaching the top, I stepped through the trapdoor and onto the walkway that circled the cabin, closing it behind me. It was habit at this point. The last thing I needed was to take an errant step and tumble down through the open hatch. I'd probably end up breaking my neck. As I passed by, I reached into the open door of the shack and grabbed the binoculars hanging on a nearby hook. Rounding the railed corner of the walkway and turning my attention to the dark green blanket of trees stretching out before me, I saw the smoke almost instantly. A thin trickle of wispy white haze rose lazily above the canopy some distance off. Probably just some campers, I figured, though there weren't any approved campsites in that area. We always had more than a few folks each season who decided that camping off-trail in the deep bush sounded like quite a hoot. Most of them come back just fine, oblivious to the danger that this wilderness presents to anyone not adequately prepared. Some of them have to be brought out by search and rescue. Some of them just don't come back. A ranger or a random hiker might occasionally come across the deserted remains of a campsite and report it in. Those are the spooky ones, the ones where people just vanished and left behind a perfectly set up campsite. No explanation, no clues, just a deserted clearing, often with perfectly intact tents and personal effects. But there are bears and mountain lions, along with a handful of lesser predators that roam these forests, and sometimes they get hungry enough to stalk and even kill humans. And that doesn't even take into consideration the much more likely scenario. Folks stepping out of their tents at night to take a piss and very quickly getting lost. Most humans aren't suited to survival in the wilderness, unfortunately. My radio squawked again. Tower 9, what's the word? Yeah, I see it, Billy. Looks to be a couple of miles due north of my tower. What's your plan? He asked. I knew what he meant. Keep an eye on it and hope for the best, or take a trip over and investigate. After a brief pause, I sighed with resignation. It's probably just a campfire, but I guess I better head over and take a look to be sure. I didn't relish the thought of trekking to that area of wilderness, to be honest. It was the only area I hadn't explored during my time here. There weren't many trails heading in that direction, and the ones that did were badly overgrown and too narrow for the Jeep. A couple of miles hike might not seem like a lot, but when you're out here alone, the dense trees seem to stretch on forever. 2 miles can feel like 100. Roger that, John, Billy replied. Take your pack and your rifle. Check in periodically. Will do. Tower 9 out, I said, replacing the binoculars on their hook and shouldering the red canvas backpack waiting dutifully in the corner chair. I grabbed the rifle from its rack over the doorframe, checked to make sure it was loaded, and headed out. As I locked the gate behind me, I threw my pack in the back of the Jeep and set the rifle beside it. The Jeep wouldn't get me too far before the brush made the trail impassable, but if it saved me even half a mile of hiking, it was well worth it. The sun was still high in the sky. I had plenty of time to get there and back before dusk, as long as I didn't dawdle. I started the engine and turned the wheels toward the unmaintained trail to my right. After only a few moments, the trees and canopy obscured any trace of the watchtower behind me. I was actually able to push the Jeep farther than expected. A pleasant surprise. I was probably a mile along the trail before it bent, and a massive pine lay across the path, much too large to go over. The dense underbrush around me ruled out the possibility of going around. I immediately lamented not bringing the chainsaw. Cutting it up and winching the pieces out of the way wouldn't have been too difficult and would have saved me a ton of trouble. With a quiet curse, I stepped out of the Jeep and grabbed my gear from the back seat. I smiled to myself as a quote from a certain fictional adventure-seeking archaeologist suddenly came to mind. We walk from here. Making sure to mark the location of the Jeep on my handheld GPS, I stepped over the thigh-high tree trunk and continued along the path. According to my earlier estimate, the trail was heading in the direction of the smoke, which was a blessing in my book. The less time I had to spend bushwhacking, the better. The trail continued to narrow, as I expected, and before long, I was brushing branches and leaves with my shoulders as I walked. The trees, which had been alive with the cheering and chirping of animal life near the tower, now seemed muted. The forest around me was growing denser, feeling oddly claustrophobic at times. Billy checked in a few times, and I updated him on my progress, promising to maintain regular contact. He advised me that a weather relay from the ranger station had reported an approaching storm, likely to reach us before nightfall. A quick glance at my watch made me wince. I had already spent more time than I'd predicted. Maybe it was best to turn around and head back. The last thing I wanted was to get caught out here overnight with minimal supplies and a rainstorm. I wasn't worried, but it sure wouldn't be comfortable. If I'd been farther from my destination, I probably would have turned back right then. I wish I had. Within another 20 minutes, however, I smelled the faint scent of a wood fire. Not strong, but definitely there. I was even more certain of what I'd find when I reached them. When I stepped out of the now almost non-existent trail, I found myself in a sparsely treed area amidst a dozen or so wooden shacks, and I halted in surprise. I had reached the base of a hilly rise covered in heavy forest, and these old, forgotten cabins looked like they had belonged to some sort of small settlement. Perhaps an old logging camp, I thought. I didn't know this place even existed, and made a mental note to research it when I got back to my tower. I keyed the microphone. "Tower 12, this is John. Do you copy?" Billy replied, his voice staticky and distant. "Hey, John, Tower 12, what's your status?" I frowned and looked around at the towering trees all around me. I suppose I was asking more out of the portable radio than was reasonable. I was lucky I still had any signal at all. "I found what looks like an old logging or trapping camp," I said, meandering among the decaying and derelict cabins. Most had collapsed roofs and were barely standing. "The campfire has to be nearby. I'm going to take a look around a bit more." There was a pause before Billy spoke again. "What's your current location, John?" I glanced at my handheld GPS and relayed my position. Another pause. "John, I think you should probably just turn back. Come back, okay? You don't have many more hours of daylight left, and that storm looks like it's getting worse." Something in his voice sounded off, but I couldn't quite place it. Nervous, maybe? I couldn't blame him. My safety was his responsibility, and the idea of one of his lookouts being caught out in a storm overnight probably didn't sit well. Coincidentally, it didn't sit well with me either. "You may be right, Billy," I replied, turning around and casting my eyes over the area. "I'll just head—" I stopped as my eyes caught sight of a bright yellow nylon tent just beyond the last of the structures. "Repeat your last, John." "I didn't get that." "Stand by." "Tower 12, I said absently, making my way toward what I now realized was a small cluster of 3 modern tents situated around a central fire ring. The fire had been completely extinguished, but the embers still smoldered lowly, the source of the smoke. I looked around for the campers. Nothing. No one in sight or earshot. Sleeping bags and electric lanterns were still inside the tents, though I couldn't find any backpacks or supplies. "Hello?" I called out, turning in a circle. "I'm with the Forest Service. Is anyone here?" Nothing, just the muted echo of my own voice. I was about to dump some dirt on the remaining embers of the campfire and call it a day when I noticed the narrow footpath leading toward the slope. In the soft dirt were clearly recent footprints heading away from the camp. I keyed the mic again. "Tower 12, this is John. I found the source of the smoke. It's a campfire, all right?" "Nothing to be concerned about," Billy answered almost immediately. "Roger that, John. Head back home." I paused a moment, curiosity pulling me toward the footpath. "I'll be heading back shortly, Billy. Just want to check something out first." "I wouldn't screw around out there, John," Billy replied, an edge to his voice. "Better head back now so you can beat the storm." His last sentence didn't exactly sound like a suggestion. Something had him rattled. I hesitated before answering. "Acknowledged," I said, knowing full well I was going to check out the path before heading back. Still, I didn't feel like arguing with my supervisor over something so small. Just a quick walk up that path, then I'd be on my way. This path was even less established than the one I'd been on earlier, but I could clearly see the campers' imprints in the dirt as I went. Before long, I emerged into a small clearing, eyes widening with yet another unexpected discovery. The rough-hewn timber that framed the entryway was set into the near vertical slope of the hillside before me. It created a dark tunnel entrance that had clearly been sealed off with a heavy iron gate many years ago. likely by the Park Service to keep inquisitive hikers from falling to their deaths in an old, abandoned mine shaft. So it had been a mining camp, not a logging one. I didn't know there were any mines near here. Hell, I wasn't even sure what they could have been mining for. Coal? Maybe gold? Did they even have gold mines in Tennessee? Who knows? Certainly not me. Clearly, regardless, now that gate stood wide on its hinges, the remains of a rusted chain and antique padlock lying in the dirt nearby. Hell, I couldn't just turn around and leave. One of these dumbass campers had decided it'd be fun to explore a closed and restricted mine entrance. This is Tower 12. This is John D. Reed. Billy probably wouldn't be happy that I'd continued my exploration after he told me to head back, but there was nothing to do about it now. I wasn't equipped or trained for any sort of cave exploration or rescue. The Rangers had very specialized teams for that sort of thing. But I could at least poke my head inside and see if there were any campers, or hear them, confirm if they went inside. No answer from the radio. I tried again, with the same results. I tried a different approach. Tower 15, this is John from Tower 12. Do you copy? I said into the radio. I figured I might be able to at least get Nathan's attention if I was out of range of Billy. Tower 12. There was a burst of static that sounded like it might have contained the hint of a human voice, but it was too distorted and distant to make anything out. There was only a moment of indecision before I made up my mind. I knew it was reckless going into the mine, especially when my supervisor believed I was currently on my way back to the tower. But I had this nagging intuition that something might be wrong with the whole situation. Maybe someone was hurt and needed help. I couldn't just leave them there, knowing that I might be their only chance of rescue. In retrospect, I should have turned back and called it in to the ranger station. They could have mobilized the search and rescue teams that specialized in cave rescues. I should have. But I didn't. I pulled my powerful LED flashlight from my pack, turned it on, and headed into the pitch-black darkness of the mine entrance. The walls and floor had been smoothly carved many years ago, which made my footing uneventful, and the tunnel itself was mostly a straight shot. Several times during the first few minutes, I turned back to watch the bright square of daylight at the entrance gradually shrink to a pinpoint of light. By the time I'd taken the first dogleg turn of the tunnel, I was in complete darkness. It was a very strange feeling, oppressive almost. At one point, I turned off my flashlight experimentally, but after only a few seconds, I quickly flicked it back on. In that short time, my heart had been pounding in my chest, and some primal fear had begun growing inside me. It took a moment to calm myself. The darkness was absolute. It was almost as if you could feel it pressing in on you. My footsteps seemed much louder than they should have on the dirt floor, and the air was growing cold and damp the further I went. After another 100 feet or so, the smoothly carved tunnel ended abruptly in a wall of rubble. I couldn't tell if it was a cave-in at some point, or if this was simply where the miners stopped digging and hadn't bothered to remove the debris. But either way, it certainly appeared to be the end of the line. And then I saw it. I almost missed it because of the way the light and shadows played over the head-sized rocks strewn before me. But when I looked closer, I realized I was looking at a ragged hole in the wall. It was only 5 feet across or so, and definitely didn't look like the deliberate formation of the tunnel I was standing in now. It almost looked like the miners had broken into a natural void of some sort. Interesting. But there was no way in hell I was going in there. I was definitely not trained or outfitted for any sort of spelunking trip, and it didn't seem the sort of thing suited to the learn-as-you-go method. Just as I was turning back to make my way out of the mine, I heard the distant sound of voices echoing from the opening in the stone wall. The sound was faint, and may have just been my imagination, but I didn't think so. "Hello?" I called, pressing my face into the black abyss of the hole. "Can you hear me? I'm with the Park Service. I'm here to help you." Nothing. The air from beyond the breach was cold and smelled stale. Old. Wrong. It felt as if I didn't belong here. None of us did. There was a long moment of unbroken silence, and then I heard a voice again, closer this time. "Did you hear that?" it said, presumably to a companion. It sounded like a young woman, nervous, uncertain. "Hello? Someone there?" That settled it for me. I carefully crawled through the opening into the space beyond. Shining my light around, I found myself in a small natural chamber, maybe 30 feet across, with an uneven ceiling of jagged rock that barely cleared my head. The first thing that caught my attention was the cracked lantern lying on the ground. It looked old, very old, maybe 100 years or more. A thick layer of grime and age covered its soot-blackened surface, and the glass was thick and uneven. Beside the askew lantern was a small leather-bound book, partially buried in the dirt and dust, with a moldering leather strap securing it closed. It looked like a journal. And without a thought, I tucked it into my backpack. Raising my light back up, scanning around the room. "Hello?" I called again. I didn't hear the voices anymore, but the narrow beam of my flashlight illuminated another tunnel in the far corner of this room, mired in darkness. "Can you hear me?" Once again, I got that feeling that something wasn't right. Then the voice came again. Closer this time. "Did you hear that? Hello? Is someone in here?" she asked, her voice trembling with apprehension. I hesitated, frowning. Something didn't seem right about the voice, but I couldn't put my finger on it. Before I could summon my words to respond, another voice called out. This time, it was clear. The voice of a young man. "We can hear you moving around in there. Please help us. We're lost, and our friend is hurt." Hear me moving around in there? I was shouting to them. I sure as hell wasn't trying to hide. Could they not hear me for some reason? I stepped forward to the secondary tunnel and raised my voice again. "I'm with the Forest Service." It was then, when I reached out to steady myself against the wall of the tunnel entrance, that my hand met something wet, and I recoiled in disgust, thinking I had just grabbed a handful of some subterranean slime. When I shone my light on it, however, it became very clear the reality was far worse. Blood. I stepped back, trying to keep the panic that was fighting to take control of my rationality at bay. I needed to keep a level head, for now. Panning my light around, I saw an astonishing amount of blood painting the wall and floor in front of me. Somebody had definitely been hurt, and badly. With blood loss like this, I wasn't sure I'd be able to stabilize them long enough to get rescue in here. What the hell happened here? And why did the hikers continue into the cave after one of them was injured this badly? Unless they lost their light and got turned around, there was no way for them to get lost. There hadn't been any branches to this tunnel since I first entered. All they had to do was turn around and walk until they saw daylight. The man's voice called again, colored with the unmistakable tinge of fear. "What the hell is that? Hurry up, Becky. Take my hand." He seemed to be getting closer. At least if I could guide them to my voice, maybe I could get them out of here. Get to higher ground. Radio for rescue evac. They had a helicopter permanently stationed at the main ranger station. It could be here in 20 minutes if I was able to reach them. The woman's voice came again, and this time I froze. "Did you hear that? Hello? Is someone in here?" All at once, it hit me. The indescribable unease I had been mostly successful in repressing now fought back with renewed vigor. I realized in that moment what I had missed previously. The woman had repeated herself, twice now. No change in her inflection, no variation in emotion or urgency. It was exactly the same, down to the syllable. It was like I was listening to a recording. "Did you hear that? Hello? Is someone in here?" repeated the male voice, now even closer. "Hurry up, Becky. Take my hand." Below the words, I could hear the stealthy sliding of something over rocks. It seemed like it wasn't too far beyond the tunnel entrance now, but I wasn't going to wait for it to emerge from the darkness. I didn't think that what I'd see emerge from the darkness would be a couple of college kids who'd had a rough time of it during a weekend camping trip. Allowing my panic to run free, I turned and threw myself through the cave breach and landed roughly on the flat stone floor of the mine shaft. Beyond skinning my hands to hell and banging my knee on a rock, scrambling my feet with a hiss of pain, I ran as fast as I could, not realizing until I finally burst into the waning light of the late afternoon that I had lost my rifle somewhere in that cave. It was darker than it was when I first entered the mine, and a quick glance to the sky showed the angry black thunderheads that had moved in, as promised, much faster than I had expected. I quickly swung the iron gate closed on screeching hinges and looped the chain between the bars as tightly as I could, securing it rather lamely with the hasp of a broken padlock. I stood there for a long moment, bent over with my hands on my knees, trying to catch my breath outside the mine entrance when I felt the first drops of the coming storm on the back of my neck. I straightened and looked through the bars of the gate into the ominous darkness beyond, realizing how ridiculous my barricade really was. It wouldn't do much good if something tried to get out, but at least it made me feel a little bit better. Until I heard the voice echoing from the mine shaft. Peh, getting closer. It was unmistakable. Uncanny. Hello, can you hear me? I'm with the Park Service. I'm here to help you. By the time dawn arrived the next morning, I had climbed down from my temporary shelter in the low boughs of the red cedar and tried to work out all the painful kinks from my stiff shoulders and neck. The night had not been kind to me, but I was alive, which is more than my fiercest mind expected after yesterday. The night had been harrowing. There was no better word to describe it. The rain hissed among the trees and stung exposed skin angrily, driven by the banshee wail of the wind rushing through the forest, accentuated by the chaotic flashing of lightning and the heart-stopping crack of thunder. Because of this relentless chaos, it's difficult to say with any certainty. But throughout the night, I thought I heard something large trying to move stealthily in the forest near my shelter. I say, trying, because it felt like whatever stalked through the underbrush was more at home in the unnatural, Stygian gloom of a cave than under the watchful eyes of nature. Of course, it could just as easily have been my imagination. In the first dim light of dawn, as it started to illuminate the sodden and dripping forest, I spent the better part of 20 minutes straining my eyes with every ounce of concentration as I scanned the gray woodlands around me. I was only 10 feet or so above the ground, but there was no way I was going to step foot from my hide until I was absolutely certain that I was alone. Once I was satisfied I was alone for the moment, I climbed down to the muddy ground. I tried the radio several times through the night and into the morning, but wasn't able to get even a burst of static that might indicate someone trying to respond. A combination of the storm and interference from the trees worked against me. My first thought was to get back to my Jeep as quickly as possible and run every drop of gas out of its tank, trying to get as far away from this place as I could. When I checked the GPS to see how close I was to its marked position, however, I found the unit unresponsive, with a disastrous crack across the screen that seemed to mock my dismay, probably caused by my less than graceful scramble from that damned cave. A rifle, no radio, no GPS. Perfect. I still had a compass and the rising sun to guide me, though, and that was something. I was only a couple miles from my tower, which should have been somewhere due south of where I stood. I knew that once I got close, I should be able to either find the service road or the tower itself, so there wasn't much danger of getting myself lost, at least. It was a small comfort, but one I gladly took. I moved through the trees and undergrowth with more speed and recklessness than I probably should have. An ankle broken by an errant misstep would have been bad news. Still, even though I hadn't heard or seen anything of my late-night visitor, I couldn't help but feel I was being watched. Do you know that creeping sense of dread you feel when you've just turned off the lights in the basement and now have to climb the stairs back to the light of the doorway? Or when you're making your way from your car in a dark and lonely parking lot? The feeling that something is there, something much more suited to the dark than you are? It's that same feeling that pushed my footsteps almost to a jog as I traversed the uneven ground and storm-felled trees that tried to hinder my passage. For the next hour, I moved at this pace, aware of every rasping lungful of breath, knowing that I should pause and rest for a few minutes, as pushing myself to fatigue would only increase my chances of falling or hurting myself. I imagined myself lying in blinding pain next to an unseen chuck hole, clutching at a broken leg and watching as the sunlight began to dim with the onset of dusk, waiting for whatever hunted my trail to find me. What would happen? Would I even have time to look on its visage before it struck? Did those campers in the cave? A misstep and a stumble that nearly made this nightmare a self-fulfilled prophecy jarred me back to the present. Against all instinct, I forced my pace to slow, first to a trot, then to a walk, and then reluctantly, I stopped completely, trying to catch my breath while I scanned the dense woodland around me. Nothing. No. Not nothing. As my heart began to slow and my breathing returned to a more manageable cadence, I turned my gaze back in the direction I had been headed, and an unconscious smile found its way to my lips. The sun had risen high in the morning sky during my flight, and now I caught a flash of its reflection on the windows of my tower, not 200 yards directly ahead of me. I laughed aloud with relief, fully aware that this fear-tinted eruption was closer to the manic cackle of lunacy than anything else. I didn't care, though. My feet started forward on their own, quickly reaching a brisk pace. A few minutes later, I burst out of the trees into the maintained clearing surrounding my tower, feeling the full sunlight on my face for the first time since yesterday. Had it only been a day? It seemed like longer. I was so filled with relief that I didn't even register the fact that the forestry department Jeep sat parked near my fenced-in tower until I started entering the combination into the gate lock. The faded white 12 emblazoned on the corner of the windshield told me that it was Billy's Jeep, which wasn't much of a surprise. I realized after a moment, after not hearing back from him, that I was more surprised I hadn't returned to find an entire search and rescue team making preparations to search for their lost puppy. I punched the 4-digit code into the mechanical combination lock on the gate and stepped through, making sure to close and lock it behind me. I stood there for a moment, staring through the tall chain-link fence at the dense tree line, wondering if something waited just out of sight in the shadows, staring back at me with hungry anticipation. I shook off the sudden chill as best as I could and made my way quickly to the staircase, taking the steps 2 at a time. Billy was going to be pissed at me, I was sure, but that thought was a fleeting one that didn't take purchase. His displeasure was the least of my concerns right now. When I reached the top, I threw open the trapdoor and suddenly found myself looking down the muzzle of a very large rifle. Even in that brief moment of abrupt shock, I could register how the barrel trembled in the hands of its agitated master, and I wondered how close I came to having my life ended in a brief flash of light. The moment only lasted a second or two, and then Billy hastily swung the rifle away in a safe direction. "Damn it, John," he exclaimed, his tone an incongruous mixture of relief and fear. "I almost shot you." I stepped fully through the trap door and let it close behind me. "Jesus, Billy," I breathed, leaning back against the railing. I suddenly felt weary and realized it was likely the adrenaline now rushing through my system that had kept me moving at such a hurried pace throughout the morning. "Where the hell have you been?" he demanded, stepping back inside my shack and taking a chair at the small table in the center of the room. I noted with mild interest that he kept the rifle leaning against the table beside him instead of stowing it in the rack over the door, but decided not to comment on it. Billy Johnson was in his middle years, maybe 45 or so, with a bit of a gut and grayish-brown hair, trimmed clothes. He wore an impressive mustache that reminded me of something an Old West gunslinger might sport. He was dressed in typical attire, khaki Forest Service shirt and brown cargo pants. In addition to the rifle, I had had the unfortunate opportunity to closely examine a moment earlier. I noticed that he wore his .500 Magnum in a holster at his side. That wasn't too unusual. When in the bush, bears and mountain lions can sneak up on you unawares. Having a hand cannon within easy reach goes a long way toward taking the fight out of them if necessary. It was a little unusual for a drive over to another tower, I suppose, but not exceptionally so, given the circumstances. I took the opposite chair, dropping my pack to the floor next to me. I realized my legs were still shaking anxiously and placed my hands on my knees to try to calm them. He was trying to deflect, but he was horrendously bad at it. He knew something. I was sure of it. "You know where I've been," I replied, gambling on instinct. I watched his face closely for a reaction and wasn't disappointed when he winced and turned his focus out the window and over the forest to the north. "I told you to abort and head back to your tower," he stated brusquely. "But you just had to feed that curiosity of yours, didn't you? You're damn lucky to be alive, you know that?" From my chair, I reached under the cupboard to my right and pulled a half-empty bottle of Jameson and a couple of mostly clean glasses. Billy turned his head and raised an inquisitive eyebrow. Alcohol was a no-no up here, but when I poured and handed him one of the glasses, he accepted it without a word. I took a pull from the other. "It's my own damn fault, I suppose," he continued, turning back fully to me. "It's been so long since anyone's even thought of Camp LeClaire that it didn't even click for me when you told me where you saw the campfire." I took another drink and then poured a bit more of the whiskey. "Camp LeClaire," I repeated. "That old mining camp?" "Logging camp, actually," he corrected me. "The mine was there long before the East Atlantic Logging Company set up out there. Nobody knows who dug it. Hell, nobody even knows when it was dug, a long time before the 19th century at least. Camp LeClaire was established in 1872, and the mine was old even before that." He looked at me in earnest for the first time since I'd returned and frowned. "You look like hell, John. Got caught in the storm, I'm guessing. Hell of a storm." I only raised my eyebrows as if to say, "What an understatement." Billy nodded knowingly and took another swallow. "Did you find the campers at least?" I shook my head and turned to look out the window to the north, where I could almost envision the black void of that mine entrance staring back at me. "No," I said softly. "I tracked them to the mine but lost them in the cave." I jumped when Billy's glass hit the floor, and he was out of his chair before I even realized it. Billy hadn't moved from his seat, but now both hands were splayed on the table before him as if to steady himself. His pale blue eyes were wide and fixed on me. "You went into the cave?" he said, a sudden and horrifying realization dawning on him. It was then I realized my mistake. He hadn't known. He thought I had just discovered the camp and the mine, and then got caught in the storm overnight. A close call, but nothing that couldn't be undone. "Yeah," I replied, nodding slowly, deliberately. "Yeah, I went into that cave looking for the campers. The gate had been cracked open already. I'm not sure by whom or when." I leaned forward in my chair and stared hard at him. "Billy, there's something in there. I think it got those campers. I think it followed me out." Billy Johnson's face had gone white then, and I thought for a moment he might pass out. He scooped his glass up from the floor with numb fingers and poured himself another splash of whiskey, downing it in one gulp. When he spoke again, it sounded far away and distant. "Utami," he muttered. "That's what the Chickasaw called it, and they were here long before we ever were. Blur is what the white man called it, among other names, Kuatami." He nodded. "False brother, lying man, something like that. Hell, I don't know. What do I look like, a translator?" "It means bad," he continued. "No matter what language you speak, it means something's out there that isn't supposed to be, something that was locked away a long time ago and forgotten." It was then that he stood and grabbed his rifle, as if suddenly remembering something. "I need to get back to my tower and make a call now." I gestured to the radio base station sitting patiently on the table near the door. "Why not use mine?" Billy shook his head. "Sorry, John. It doesn't work that way. Special phone, special number. I just hope I'm not too late." I started to stand. "I'll go with you," I said. He pointed a stern finger at me and narrowed his eyes. "No, you stay here, strap on your handgun, and make sure it's loaded." His voice was calm, almost cold, and didn't leave much room for debate. Still, I had no desire to stay alone with whatever this angler thing was roaming around out here. "Billy, I can go with you. I can help." I started to argue, but it was quickly cut off when he took a menacing step toward me. And I realized quickly how much I'd underestimated him because of his normally easy manner. "You will stay in your goddamn tower, and you will follow orders," he roared. I took an unconscious step back and reclaimed my seat, only managing a shaking nod in agreement. He took a trembling breath, pointed at the radio, and said in a slightly less terrifying tone, "And keep that thing on. As soon as I'm back at my tower, I'll radio you with updates." A moment later, he was gone, and the trapdoor slammed shut behind him. I stood and retrieved the Pelican case from under my cot. Inside was the same model of .500 Magnum revolver that Billy had been wearing, heavy and cold in my hands. I loaded it and belted it on the leather holster, feeling the reassuring weight tugging at my waist. "John?" I heard Billy call from below. I went outside to the walkway, leaning over the railing. He was standing beside his Jeep, 50 feet below, shielding his eyes from the bright sunlight as he looked up at me. "Make sure to keep everything locked. I'll come back for you," he shouted. I raised a hand to him and slid the latch shut on the trapdoor with my toe. I turned back into my shack as I heard Billy's Jeep fire up, and a moment later, it drove off down the rough service road toward his tower. I glanced back to the north, to the place where I had first seen the campfire smoke rising the day before, and suppressed a shudder. I was alone again, safe in my tower and armed, but alone. Abruptly, like an unexpected wave of nausea, the feeling that I was being watched washed over me with a chill, making the hairs on the back of my neck stand on end. I looked back over my shoulder to where Billy had been only a minute before, but saw only the rough service road and dense, impenetrable tree line beyond. That's probably just my imagination, but the feeling didn't diminish, and with every passing breath, I was more and more certain that there was something nearby, just out of sight, standing stone still in the gray-green foliage, waiting. I stood there a long moment, eyes straining for any hint of movement or alien shape among the shadows. But if there was, my human eyes weren't sharp enough to pick it out. I stepped back through the open doorway of my shack and dropped down into the chair again, my eyes catching the bottle of whiskey before me. I was tempted to pour another drink to help settle my nerves, but I could already feel the tickle of a buzz at the edges of my mind from what I'd already drunk, and quickly decided that was the last thing I needed for my reflexes and awareness to be dulled right now. I'd made more than one poor decision in the last 24 hours, and I didn't think adding another to the pile was such a great idea. Grabbing the bottle, I screwed the cap back on and reached to return it to the sparse cover to my right. As I did so, my boot caught my pack, knocking it over. Without a thought, I reached down to move it out of the way, and then remembered the old weather journal tucked inside the front pocket, the one I'd found in the cave. I reached into the unzipped front pocket. For a frustratingly alarming moment, my searching hand couldn't feel anything in the compartment, and I feared that I'd lost it in my chaotic escape. But then my fingers brushed the familiar shape, and I withdrew it, setting it in front of me on the table. I could see the book much more clearly now in the daylight. It wasn't overly large. A little larger than my hand, and maybe the thickness of my thumb. There were no markings on the front except for a simple, grimy brass loop that secured the leather strap holding it closed. I wasn't sure I wanted to see what was inside, but I needed some answers. Anything. A stray sound from the trees below rose to my ears, and I froze, listening intently for more, but none came. The forest around me was silent again, and I turned my attention back to the journal, pulling the strap free from the cover and turning to the front page. "From the pocket of Andrew Robinson," it said. The writing was neat and compact and distinctly male. The ink was a rich black, scrawled upon brittle yellow pages, and though faded with the years, was still mostly legible. I turned to the next page, where the entries began. I felt as though I had dropped into his account midway, as though this was just the latest in a series of journals that Andrew Robinson had been keeping. 23rd July, 1891. After nearly a week of hard overland trekking, we reached the abandoned camp late this afternoon, exactly where the old trapper said we would. Sequoia Arpani, tracker, has once again astonished me with his overland navigation skills. I must admit I was skeptical at the Yar in the old tavern, spun the crowded confines of the common house in Dun Creek, especially after I smelled the liquor on his breath. But the professor never gathered a moment. The man's instincts for reading human character are absolutely singular. The camp looks to have been abandoned, and I have to admit a certain unease as we inspected the rough cabins. There isn't a soul to be found, and it looks years abandoned, yet everything stands as if awaiting the loggers' return at any moment. Strange. 24th July, 1891. Our small troop, both intrepid adventurers, made camp in the center of LeClaire last night. Those cabins likely would have been more comfortable, but I doubt any of us would have felt at ease intruding upon them. Richards laughed it off when someone mentioned how peculiar it was that the loggers had departed in such a hurry that they abandoned their personal possessions. But I could see in his eyes that he felt it odd as well. Sequoia, our ever-courageous and solid guide, seemed ill at ease and unusually withdrawn, refusing all conversation and only responding in queries with quiet grunts. Something of concern hides behind his eyes, though, and I wonder what it is. Only the professor seems unmoved by the unusually still atmosphere of this place, and his typical infectious positivity keeps working at our unease, keeping it from expanding beyond its current state. Today, we spent much of the day exploring the area surrounding Camp LeClaire, and the sunlight was nearly spent when Dobson burst back into camp with news of his discovery. We all of us raced at a moment's notice behind him as he led us along an ill-used and nearly invisible footpath that led ever ascending upon the side of the northern rocky slope. When the path terminated, we were deposited before a truly curious sight, a barricaded tunnel entrance that had been bored into the rock face by some unknown hands. I suspect some sort of exploration tunnel or added dug-in search of precious ores, especially given the nation's more recent history with gold fever. The wooden barrier that had been roughly assembled from a hodgepodge of heavy timber beams was curious, and several of our group commented on it. But the professor dismissed the triviality, so the matter was dropped. It is far too late in the day to proceed any further, but we plan to penetrate the barricade and enter the tunnel in the morning. The excitement among the men is palpable. 25th July 1891. Sequoia is gone. He took his supplies and his prized Winchester rifle and fled sometime during the night like a phantom. This is a shocking blow to all of us, foreign to the professor, with whom the Pawnee tracker had partnered for a number of years across much of the eastern states. We have no explanation for his sudden desertion, and it sits unwell with the entirety of the group. The overall mood has darkened, I fear. Still, we must push onward. 25th July 1891 addendum. It took more than 2 hours of hard labor, but we were finally able to gain entrance to the mine shortly before noon today. Richards managed to get his boot caught between two heavy timbers as he stumbled forward, straining his ankle with a terrible cry. We feared it broken, but Dr. Franklin assured us that his bones seemed intact. Regardless, Richards was taken back to the camp, where he will convalesce while the rest of us make our entry. His part in our exploration has come to an end for now. We made our way in a single file through the added tunnel for some way before reaching its carved end. The light from our oil lanterns providing regrettably inadequate illumination over the rocky surroundings. When we reached the terminus of the mine tunnel, our hearts sank for a moment before the professor gave an exclamation of discovery and suddenly disappeared through a nearly hidden rift in the wall, surrounded by jagged rocks. We eagerly followed him through, careful of our footing as we went, and found ourselves in what I can only assume to be an accidental breach by the miners into a natural cave system. The air was chill and unmoving, but our excitement over this discovery laid any concerns or discomfort this may have caused. The professor directed us to set up a secondary camp in this new chamber, which we'll use as a staging point for further exploration. So, we spent the rest of the day bringing supplies for our main camp and constructing a smaller version in this moderately sized chamber. By the time we completed this endeavor, the efforts of the day precluded the start of the exploration until the group has had the opportunity to rest and replenish their energy. I feel I will sleep well tonight despite the anxious excitement buzzing around my mind. 26th July, 1891. Another shock. When we woke this morning, O'Connor is gone. The Irishman, who has ever been reliable and constant as the North Star, was assigned first watch last night. There is no trace of him, and no indication that he took any provisions or even his personal rucksack with him. I fear his natural inquisitiveness may have gotten the best of him and led him to explore the deeper caverns beyond our ad hoc base camp, for his lantern is the sole item that has gone missing with his person. The professor immediately rallied the rest of our small group, 7 in all now, and mounted a search for our lost companion. I tried to caution him against rushing into action, but he was not to be deterred. To my dismay, I was the sole man ordered to remain here at camp, whilst my companions took up their supplies and launched deeper into the cave system in the event young O'Connor returned in their absence. I was understandably disappointed, but grasped the logic of it well enough. I would loathe to think of O'Connor returning only to find us all gone, and then losing himself again, trying to find us. I shall endeavor to rest a bit. With luck, my companions will return before long with our lost compatriot. 27th July, 1891. I am at my wit's end, and I'm unsure how to proceed. It has been more than a day since the professor led the rest of the men in search of poor O'Connor, and I have felt their absence as keenly as I am aware of my own solitude in this cave. I've seen nothing of our missing companion or the party that delved deeper into the system yesterday morning, and I know their lanterns did not have sufficient fuel to carry them for this long without other means of illumination to guide their return. I fear they are hopelessly lost. I myself had to return to Leclerc for more lantern oil for my waning light. I must admit, with no little embarrassment and some reluctance, to my return to this dark place, which no longer carries any of its former adventurous excitement or fascination. It is now nothing more than a doorway into the deep places below the earth, where men were never intended to tread. But the growing apprehension is not the worst of it. The sounds, by heaven's grace, the sounds. I first became aware of them last night as I did my lantern and tried to set myself to sleep. At first, it was only an indistinct and muted echo, which may have been interpreted as nothing more than the distant whistle of wind or other natural sound distorted by the unique acoustics of this place. Then I heard the distinct tonal qualities that could only be a man's voice. I instantly rose and took my lantern, raising the flame and rushing to the entrance of the cave that swallowed my companions. There I stood, listening with such keen focus that I felt beads of sweat upon my brow. I would swear upon a holy book that it was the distant call of the professor himself, and I eagerly called back with as much fervor as I could summon, hoping desperately to guide them back to me. However, the instant I called out, the voices vanished, and I was met only with the suffocating silence of an open tomb. There I stood, straight as a sentinel, praying for a response from my friends. After several minutes of absolute silence, my thoughts began turning to dark things. I became painfully aware that anything beyond the weak cast of my lantern would be utterly invisible to me. But I, on the other hand, would be lighted as a beacon to it. I pushed these thoughts from my mind as forcefully as I could, inwardly chastising myself for seeing ghouls where none existed. I was about to call out again to my lost companions when I heard it. The voice came again, echoing from the claustrophobic abyss that lay before me, mired in the blackest darkness one could imagine. It was still some distance away, I estimated, but I was certain it seemed closer now. When the third time I heard it, I was just barely able to make out the words, but it was enough to be sure. My own words echoed back at me from the depths of that damned cave, and in my own voice, I staggered and nearly dropped the lantern. At that moment, could the legends be true? The professor always seemed to believe them, though I must admit I attributed his faith to the unwavering certainty he held in those things lost to antiquity. He'd always maintained that a legend, especially one whispered by so many indigenous people without mutual contact, must have some root in truth. But that line of reasoning is antithetical to modern civility, and I must reject it and focus on the more probable explanation that my already stressed nerves were turning my fears against me. The voices must be those of my companions, lost in the dark, but near enough to hear their calls. They must be. I'm not certain what lies next, but I know that I cannot abandon my companions, my friends, to wander the darkness until they fall from exhaustion or dehydration. Not while I might yet help them. I will leave this written account at the entrance to the cave. This lantern is nearly spent, but I have another with a full vessel that'll take its stead. If I do not return, at least someone may know of our passing here. May God be with us all. I closed the journal with a trembling hand, momentarily lost in what I just read. How is it possible? The journal was more than 130 years old. No animal alive then could be what pursued me now. What if it's not an animal? The sudden burst of static from Billy's call that simultaneously erupted from my radio base station and the portable handset clipped to my shoulder made me jump and drop the journal to the floor, heart pounding. I cursed under my breath and keyed the microphone. "Go for Tower 9, I answered, my voice tight as I spoke. My eyes drifted out across the sky to the east, where darkening thunderheads had been unknowingly gathering and marching slowly in my direction. I shook my head. Icing on the cake, I thought. "John, what's your position?" asked Billy, the self-assured authority that filled his tone now strangely absent, replaced with something else, fear. I frowned a moment at the question before answering. "What do you think, Billy? I'm in my tower, just like you told me." A strange pause before he spoke again. "John, this isn't some sort of joke, right? You're not outside my tower?" I was growing more agitated by the moment. What sort of question was that? I had no Jeep. There was no way I could have made it to his tower in such a short amount of time, even if I'd wanted to. "No, Billy," I answered with more force than I intended. "I'm not outside your tower." I stopped mid-sentence, a horrified realization sweeping over me. In that moment, I tried to speak, but my mouth had gone dry. "Billy," it was all I could muster. The radio was silent as my eyes slowly drifted to the west, where I could just make out the small, lonely shape of Tower 12. Barely visible over the darkening blanket of green. Was that a gunshot? Another night, another goddamn night stuck in this window-lined prism. At least I have a good view, so I guess that's something. The storm raged all night again last night, and only let up just before dawn. At one point, the winds were gusting hard enough to rock the tower, which was a bit disconcerting, to say the least. As I stand out on the wet catwalk around my shack, I see that the clouds haven't let us go just yet, and look every bit as pissed off as they did yesterday afternoon. It seems like the last dry season has come to an end, which is good since I've been slacking a bit on my fire-watching duties over the last couple of days. Gallows humor, right? Due to that, or I'm sitting in the corner in a fetal position crying. I've been told by my ex-fiancée that I'm not an attractive crier. I haven't heard Pete from Billy since his last terrifying broadcast to me yesterday. I tried to reach him several times since then, but no dice. I've also tried reaching Nathan and the ranger station, but all I get is static, even from my base radio set. When I first started here, I remember Billy telling me during my brief orientation that the radio should be able to reach out 50 miles or more, so I'm not sure what's going on with them. Update. I just took a quick look at the base station and found that the cable leading up to the antenna on the roof of the shack is now just a dangly thing swaying in the breeze. The storm must have decided it needed the antenna more than I did because it's gone. I can see where the screws were torn out of the wooden mast. And before you say anything about whatever this thing is that's been stalking around and deciding to sabotage my radio, I should probably tell you that the wooden antenna mast looks like it's been around for a long time. The wood was probably dry rotted to begin with, and now that it's soaked, it's crumbled away into little wet brown bits as soon as I probed it with my fingers. Speaking of whatever this Kwatami or angler thing is, and I'm just going to call it a mimic, I think I haven't heard anything weird since yesterday. I'm assuming it's still over there somewhere, but I don't think it's nearby. If it's still anywhere around here, it's probably somewhere over near Tower 12, or at least that's what makes the most sense to me anyways. Which brings me to my shiny new lunatic idea, my Jeep. It can't be more than a mile down the northern track, still sitting there in front of that fallen pine. I could probably get to it in less than an hour, even with this wet and muddy ground. It had almost a full tank of gas, and I'm pretty sure I could outrun this mimic thing in it if I could get a straight shot down the service road. I definitely don't relish the idea, mind you. Every instinct is screaming at me to sit my butt right down where I am in this tower, and I know the ranger station will start getting a little antsy when Billy doesn't check in after a few days, but I'm also thinking they may extend it out a day or two in light of the foul weather. Maybe 5 days out in the wilderness, and then I'll have a ranger truck parked outside my tower. The question is, what they'll find when they get here. See, I've been thinking about it. Billy definitely knew more about this thing than I do. Certainly enough to not open the door when he heard it outside, pretending to be a Girl Scout selling cookies. That makes me think that maybe the fence and the trapdoor might not be enough to stop it if it really wants in. As pants shittingly terrified as the prospect of leaving the tower and making for the Jeep is, sitting here cornered in my window-lined shack, just waiting for it to show up in the middle of the night, is worse. At least I have a chance out there. I still have the Magnum. It's been holstered to my belt since yesterday. They don't issue pea shooters for bear protection out here. This thing is the most powerful handgun in mass production. It'll put down anything in North America as long as you can hit it right. Any normal animal, anyways. Who knows what this thing is capable of? Still, it does provide a level of comfort and gives me some confidence that my plan may work. It's on my side for now. I'm going to try to eat a granola bar to put something in my churning stomach and try to build a little energy. I don't think I've eaten anything since yesterday. After that, I'm grabbing my pack and heading out. Wish me luck. I left my tower shortly after 10 a.m., and let me tell you, those were some of the most difficult first steps I've ever taken in my life. Stepping out through the chain link fence into that open space beyond my small compound felt like I was stepping off the roof of a skyscraper. When I closed the gate behind me, I stood there motionless. Must have been 5 minutes, frozen in place with my hand clenching the grip of my revolver that's holstered at my belt. Even with all the stress and anxiety swirling around in my head, I was amazed at how keen my senses seemed in that moment. I felt like I could hear every rustle of leaves and smell every damp patch of moss in the thousands of acres of wilderness surrounding me. In that moment, I felt very small, very insignificant, trivial. When my chest began to ache, I realized that I'd been holding my breath in subconsciously, afraid to make even the smallest sound. I let out a slow breath and forced myself to breathe normally again, scanning the trees. I turned slowly in a circle, eyes searching for anything that seemed out of place, like it didn't belong. But there was nothing there. Everything seemed normal, at least to me. Casting one last look over my shoulder at the refuge of my tower, I started off along the seldom-used service road to the north, careful of my footing on the muddy and uneven ground. I allowed myself to move at a slow jog, fast enough to make good progress, but not so fast that I was announcing my presence to the world. Not so fast that I couldn't hear the forest around me over my own breathing. I stopped a couple of times during my trek to catch my breath and take a drink of water, and thankfully still seemed alone and unpursued for now. I wondered if it was out there somewhere among the dense trees, hiding in the muted gray shadows of the forest. Or perhaps it had returned to my tower in my absence and found it empty, and was even now tracking my flight along this trail. If I paused long enough, would it suddenly appear, rounding the gentle curve behind me as it caught up to me in order to prefer to move more stealthily among the trees and underbrush, laying in wait alongside the path ahead, ready for my approach? I had to forcibly shake myself of that line of thought. It wasn't doing me any good now. I was committed to my plan. The thought of retracing my steps and returning to my lonely watchtower held just as much terror, because now it's out there, unmanned, unwatched, and abandoned. For all I know, the mimic could be there at this very moment, ransacking my shack. I definitely didn't want to walk in on that little scene. I can promise you that much. I ended up making surprisingly good time on that northern path. It was only about 30 minutes before I saw the dim shape of my Jeep waiting dutifully in the middle of the path ahead. The matte tan paint job and black cloth roof stood out remarkably well against the muted greens and browns of the surrounding forest. Urging my pace to quicken, I covered the last 100 yards before I even realized it and found myself standing at the door, hand on the handle. I paused. A chill ran down my spine, inciting an unbidden shiver, and I realized then how quiet the forest around me was. I wasn't sure how long it had been this way. I felt that something was out of place, and so did the native fauna. On any given day, the trees were alive with the sounds of wildlife. Squirrels and chipmunks chittered, insects buzzed, and 1,000 varieties of birds called and sang from the treetops. Not now, though. Now it was as if they had all left. It felt very alone in that moment, only not quite alone. Somewhere out there, in that sea of trees, something stalked, something that didn't belong in the light of day, something that didn't belong under the watchful eyes of Mother Nature. I was pretty sure she wouldn't have let something like the mimic evolve had it not been hidden in its underground realm. The door of the Jeep was thankfully quiet as I depressed the latch and swung it open. If this had been a horror movie, I'm sure an ear-splitting screech would have erupted from its hinges. But in real life, we tend to take care of these vehicles pretty well. In the best of times, they are the only convenient transportation for 20 miles or more. In times like this, though, it was likely the only thing that would save my sorry ass. I jumped in and pulled the door shut behind me with a dull thunk, subconsciously locking it. I almost laughed when I did that. The entire top of the Jeep was nothing more than canvas and plastic windows. A feisty hamster could probably have penetrated my little haven, and I doubt the mimic would even think twice about it. The Jeep fired up immediately when I turned the key in the ignition, and I threw it in reverse for the most ungraceful 14-point turn you've ever seen on the narrow and muddy service road. Once I got it turned around, I didn't waste any time directing it the way I'd come. The service road was really little more than an uneven and ill-maintained dirt trail, and was only ever used infrequently by the rangers and lookouts. As I'd previously mentioned, it was a rough ride, even for the heavy suspension of my trusty steed, so I had to keep it at a reasonable speed. The very last thing I needed was to snap an axle or bounce myself right off the road and into the trees. Considering the condition of the trail, with the fact that it constantly wound and curved as it progressed, it meant that even my best speed wasn't much faster than I could run on foot. That's okay. Once I got past my tower, the service road was generally better maintained and followed a more or less straight path. I'd be able to build some decent speed there and be out of the wilderness and standing at the ranger station in an hour or so. The abrupt appearance of my tower caused me to feather off the gas as I rounded the last curve from the northern track. I slowed to a crawl and squinted through the now dirty windshield. From here, everything looked exactly like I had left it. The gate still stood closed, and looking up, I could see the trapdoor also appeared shut. Maybe this thing hadn't returned. Hell, maybe this thing wasn't ever going to return. For all I knew, I was headed in the opposite direction. It's not like looking at a GPS on it or anything. It was at that moment that I nearly pissed myself when the radio, still clipped to my belt, squawked, and I heard probably the last thing I had ever expected to hear. "John, are you there?" The signal was pretty clear, but his voice sounded weak, strained. I almost didn't respond. I was frozen in indecision, clouding my mind. I didn't know what I could trust to be true, but I doubted that this mimic had read the radio manual and learned how to operate the handset. I snatched the handset from my shoulder and keyed the mic. "Billy? Holy? Is that you?" He answered me right away, and I thought I could hear relief in his tone, buried under his pained words. "John? Thank God. I was afraid you were gone." My eyes drifted to the trail leading past my tower toward the ranger station, toward safety. Another 5 minutes, and I would have been there. I got to my Jeep, and I was just about to haul ass for the ranger station when I replied, "What's your status?" There was a moment of silence, and I wondered briefly if he hadn't even heard me. But then he answered, "I'm not doing too hot, John. I'm in my tower, but that thing hurt me. I've lost a lot of blood, and I've been drifting in and out. I've patched myself up as best as I could. I stopped the bleeding for my leg." He frowned and closed his eyes for a moment, asking a question I was pretty sure I knew the answer to. "Are you able to get back to your Jeep?" I thought I heard a coughing bark of laughter before he answered. "I don't think so. Pretty banged up, man. What happened?" "Billy, son of a... It got into my tower, managed to get a shot off, but not before it got a jump on me. I took off before it did me in, so I think I hit it. I don't know where it is now, though. My tower is wide open, and it hasn't come back, so maybe it's dead." I doubted that. Things never work out that simply. "Are you stable, Billy? Can you be moved?" Another silence, and then he said, "I know what you're thinking, John. Just turn your Jeep around and haul ass to the ranger station. That's an order." I dropped my forehead to the steering wheel, closing my eyes and cursing. It would have been easier if Billy hadn't radioed me. I know it's selfish. I know I'm an idiot for even thinking it, but I could have been blissfully out of range if he'd only waited for 10 more minutes. Still, I put the throttle down and got the hell out of there. I could still race for the ranger station, have them mobilize a chopper to come back for Billy. But they were at least an hour away. Factor in the spin-up time for the helicopter, and you're talking more like an hour and a half before anyone gets to him. It didn't sound good. Something told me it was unlikely he'd last that amount of time. I could still turn left. I'd likely live. But could I live with myself knowing that I left Billy to die alone in his tower? What if our situations had been reversed? Sure, I might be saying the same words he was saying now, but in my heart, I'd be pleading for that voice on the radio to help me. I couldn't imagine being in his position, lying there, hurt, bleeding out, knowing that his safe haven was wide open and that thing was out there somewhere. Look, I know what you're going to say. I know what you're probably saying already. Don't be a dumbass. This is exactly why everyone dies in a horror movie. I get it, believe me. I get it. But this wasn't a movie. My friend was lying there, dying in his shack. If I could get to him and get him into the Jeep, we could both get out of there, leaving this twisted nightmare behind us. Billy, I'm headed your way. Get ready, because we're going to wrestle you down the stairs and into my Jeep as quickly as we can, I said, cranking the wheel to the right and taking the western trail with more speed than I should have. John, I gave you an order. Get out of here now. Despite the situation, I managed to start a grin as my rig bucked and bounced over the uneven trail. Billy, I'd like to take this opportunity to officially tender my resignation from the Fire Watch. Now shut your mouth and conserve your strength. I'll be there in 15 minutes. 15 minutes. Trying to be a pretty good guess, and before long, I skidded to a halt outside Tower 12, next to Billy's ride. I opened the door and stepped out into the quiet air, my handgun coming from its holster and held before me like some sort of shield. I took a quick moment to let my eyes roam over the surrounding woodlands for any sign of movement, before quickly jogging around my Jeep and toward the compound's entrance. I passed through an open doorway, taking note of the heavy chain-link gate that was lying twisted 15 feet inside the fence. Another dozen paces, and I was at the base of the stairs, craning my neck to make sure nothing was awaiting me above. I kept the mic on my shoulder and said in a low voice, "Billy, I'm outside your tower right now, heading up. For Christ's sake, don't shoot me." I turned the volume on the speaker down just in time for his response. "Damn it, John. I told you to leave." Despite his words, the gratitude and relief were clear in his tone. I started up the stairs, revolver still held at the ready as my other hand ran lightly up the railing. My eyes were drawn to the red-black spots staining the gray paint of the steel steps. I found even more of the viscous liquid on the railing as I continued my ascent. Blood, but not Billy's. God, I hope that thing is lying in the woods, breathing its last breath. He definitely hit it, but I had no way of telling how seriously it was hurt. In a human, red blood indicated an arterial bleed, which was typically a fairly significant injury. With this thing, who knew what black-red meant? I climbed the rest of the stairs around the tower and stopped just below the open trapdoor. "Billy?" I called cautiously. A pause, then came his reply, shaky and with a wheezing sound I didn't like at all. "How do I know it's you? Say something I couldn't have heard you say before." "I have always admired and respected you," I answered without hesitation. He said under his breath, "Come on up." I took another couple of steps, cautiously poking my head through the trapdoor. Billy was sitting upright, more or less, resting his back against the doorframe of his shack and aiming his own handgun generally in my direction. As soon as he saw my face, he dropped his hand to the side, the stainless steel barrel clanging against the metal walkway. As I stepped fully through the trapdoor, I noticed two things immediately. Firstly, there was a significant amount of that black-red goo splattered around. Secondly, I realized how badly injured Billy was. His face had gone gray with a sickly paleness, and his breaths came in ragged hitches. Blood-soaked bandages wrapped both forearms, and his face was covered in a crimson rag taped haphazardly down. His entire khaki park shirt was painted in a hellish tie-dye of shades of red, but it was his leg that worried me the most. A tourniquet had been tied around his thigh, and he was groaning, but the pants leg was a cherry red below that, glistening in the late morning light. "Jesus, Billy," I exclaimed, holstering my gun and rushing to his side. He waved me off, saying, "All beside me. I know it looks bad. Save it for later. Let's get out of here before that thing decides to come back for another round." I nodded and stood again, taking a quick glance past him into his shack. A twin of my own tower, normally Billy's looked like a war zone now. His table and desk had both been overturned and smashed, along with his base-set radio on the floor. On the floor nearby was a satellite phone, its antenna and display obviously smashed during the attack. Lifting his arm over my head, I helped him to his feet. He grimaced in pain, but threw his remaining strength in with mine, and we began the precarious descent through the trapdoor. "Did you at least get to make your phone call?" I asked him as we took the steps carefully and agonizingly slow. He shook his head. "Got here just as I was getting ready to. Excusing your voice, telling me that you were from the Park Service and you were here to help." He looked at me with a shaking astonishment. "Sounded just like you, John." I looked over the catwalk, railing down at it. He winced again as we stumbled on a step. "Almost there, John," he continued. "Well, yeah, I've never seen anything like it." I shook my head as we reached the bottom step and moved onto the rain-soaked ground. I grunted with exertion. "Save it, Billy. We've got a long ride ahead of us. Plenty of time for that later." He just nodded as I maneuvered him and ran to the passenger side of the Jeep and helped him climb in. Once he was in, I hurried back around to the driver's side door, got in, started the engine, and pulled the door closed behind me. Throwing it into reverse, I felt the wheels break loose as I stepped on the gas with a bit too much enthusiasm. I swung the 4x4 around and put it into drive, pointing it back toward my tower and beyond. Safety. I only had a heartbeat's warning from Billy before I saw it barreling from the underbrush at us. It threw itself, a great mass, crashing into the side of the Jeep, and Billy scrambled to get away from it, damn near climbing over the center console in the process and knocking my hands off the wheel. In a panic, the Jeep swung wildly left, and I stomped down on the brakes to avoid slamming into the trees. One of the front wheels dipped off the road, and the steel bumper crashed through a small cluster of oak saplings, halting us abruptly. The engine stalled, and everything went silent in that moment as we froze. My breath hitched in my lungs, and my eyes widened in shock as I laid eyes upon the abomination for the first time. My first impression was that it was much larger than I had thought, but the nightmare visage before me eclipsed such a pedestrian observation. The thing stood in the middle of the trail, still shaking its head as if trying to recover its senses after the collision with a 2-ton vehicle. It looked vaguely humanoid in a sense, but it walked on 4 limbs, clearly proportioned to such a task. It was hairless, and its mottled pink-gray skin stretched taut over muscles, bones, and odd, unidentifiable bulges. The limbs seemed to have joints that bent in all the wrong directions and ended in what had been claws, but instead of the distinctive keratin-composed sharp nails that seemed so familiar in the natural world, these seemed to be extensions of the creature's skeletal structure, protruding painfully through its veiny, translucent hide. The worst of all was the bulbous and disproportionately large head, topped with an oddly gaunt-appearing neck. It was oblong and reminded me of the shape of a feline's skull. Its mouth seemed a jagged tear across its face, with ill-fitting and chaotically positioned teeth that didn't seem to allow the mouth to close properly. I couldn't see any eyes, but where they should have been, instead, there were 2 bulbous and cyst-like organs, seemingly bulging and flattening in a slow rhythm as if bladders were filling with air or liquid. I reeled back in revulsion as it turned its sightless head in our direction, searchingly. Flaps of skin on either side of its malformed snout opened slowly, like some obscene blossom composed of milky gray bat wings, and I had the sense that it was using them to try to somehow locate us. It was then I saw where Billy's shot had struck the creature in the face. One of the snout flaps was nearly completely severed, hanging limply in contrast to its sibling. A gouge furrowed by the bullet's travel creased along the right side of the thing's head, piercing and ravaging the bulbous organ on that side and leaving it a deflated sac. When it turned its head further in our direction, I could see clearly where it had bled significantly from the shot, but I was horrified to see that the wound had already sealed itself, leaving a shiny silver scar to mark the incident. "I knew I hit you, you bastard," Billy whispered, half to himself. The mimic stopped its motion, and we watched as the uninjured bladder on its head expanded like a half-filled party balloon. It dipped its head a bit, and we saw 2 membranous slits in the top of its skull dilate. A moment later, the twisted sound of a human voice assaulted our ears. "I know you're out there." The voice was unmistakably Billy's, but it was distorted and wrong. I thought that the wound from his gunshot probably had something to do with that. The thing raised its head again, turning a bit more in our direction. It took a few experimental steps forward, then paused and lowered its head. This time, we heard what sounded like the painful roar of a beast, almost perfectly replicated, except for that same distortion we had heard previously. "Killed a bear." I held my breath as we watched it again raise its head and take a few more contemplative steps in our direction, slowly swinging its grotesque snout back and forth. I could see how the flaps of skin that were flared open, where its nose should have been twitched minutely back and forth, and I felt like it was using them to listen for us. "Knows we're here somewhere, but he can't see us," whispered Billy, leaning close. "But if it gets close enough, I'm thinking we're done for." I looked over at Billy and realized that there was no way he'd be able to make a run for it in his condition. From the look of the thing growing ever closer to where we cowered in our Jeep, I thought it was likely we didn't have much time before it got close enough to hear our breathing, our heartbeats, or whatever, even inside the 4x4, and when that happened, I knew what would come next. Billy closed his eyes for a moment and turned to me. There was something in his eyes then, sort of acceptance. So he didn't like it one bit, "Get ready with the cannon," he whispered. "Only gonna get one chance at this." "What are you talking about?" I asked. A moment later, I had my answer. Billy took a deep breath and mustered every bit of strength to fling the door open and stagger out of the Jeep. "I'm right here," he shouted, limping weakly across the road from the Jeep. The mimic whipped its head in his direction instantly, but tilted its head to the side, seemingly momentarily puzzled at this unexpected turn of events. Billy held his own magnum in his hand, but it was too weak to raise it towards the beast. Still, he pulled the trigger, and a resounding boom seemed to shake the air. The mimic flinched at the defining sound of the gunshot, the flap of membrane at its snout snapping shut protectively. But its stunned hesitation didn't last very long. In an instant, faster than I would have thought possible, it launched itself on powerful limbs at Billy, knocking him to the ground and tearing at him with teeth and claws. I heard my friend screaming, then a horrible, soul-rending sound that I'll never forget as long as I live. But now was my chance, and I took it. I swung the door open and stepped out of the Jeep, my gun coming free of its holster in the same moment. The creature was preoccupied with what was left of Billy, but as soon as I brought the gun up and thumbed back the hammer, its head swung around at me. It crouched like a compressed spring, preparing to launch, but I was quicker. The report of the gunshot was incredible, and the recoil from the powerful round rocked my wrist back painfully. The beast staggered, and I saw a burst of blood and tissue explode from a wound where its shoulder met its neck. It howled an otherworldly cry, sounding like a bedlam mixture of man and beast. But though the wound seemed terrible, it tried once again to throw itself at me. I was set on my course, though, and took step after step toward the creature, pulling the trigger again and again until the gun ran dry. All I was left with was the clicking of the hammer and a high-pitched ringing in my ears. The acrid smell of gunpowder stung my nose, and by the time I finally stopped, I found myself within only a few feet of the horrific thing. 6 blackened holes stippled the neck and torso of the creature where the bullets had entered, and I knew that the destruction of their exits on the opposite side would be far worse. The mimic lay sprawled across the ruined body of Billy Johnson, its weight crushing whatever had been left of my friend. Black-red blood spread out from beneath the thing's bulk like an oil spill across a smooth floor. I noted with some muted surprise that the creature still twitched and slowly flexed its powerful muscles, and a wheezing sound was quietly emanating from the slits on the top of its skull. I holstered my empty handgun and scanned around the ground for what I knew was there. A moment later, I spotted it. Billy's own magnum, lying half buried in the muck where it had been torn from its grip under the weight of the monster. I snatched it up and shook it clear of most of the mud and grass. Opening the cylinder, I saw that only one unfired round remained. That was enough, though. I approached the horror before me without apprehension or pause, my eyes focused on this thing that had caused so much pain and terror. I thumbed the hammer back and placed the muzzle against the mimic's head, which still convulsed with some small remaining life. I didn't know if it would be able to heal from the wounds I had already inflicted. Logic told me it was unlikely, but the silvery scar I'd seen from Billy's previous encounter caused me to question everything I thought was possible. I felt the tremors from the creature vibrate through the gun as the barrel rested against its skull, right between where its eyes should have been. I tensed my finger on the cold steel of the trigger, and the crack of the gunshot echoed throughout the forest. It was done. But even as I walked back numbly to the Jeep and restarted the engine, I wondered if that was true. I thought back to the journal I'd read, written more than 130 years before, and how it alluded to the tales of this creature going back long before then. As I drove the Jeep along the rough and winding service road, I wondered at the possibility that what we encountered was the only one of its kind. That the same beast had somehow terrorized cultures separated from each other by great time and distance, spawning the legends that the author of the journal and his companions pursued. It didn't seem likely. And now the door was open.